achieve that goal.
Well, we will officially start at 7:03 for the regular meeting of the City of Sandy Planning Commission, and today is Monday, September 24th, 2018. Start with a roll call, see who's here.
Commissioner Carlton.
Present.
Commissioner Lisowski.
Here.
Commissioner McLean Wenzel. Commissioner Logan. Commissioner Mobley.
Here.
Commissioner Abrams. And Chairman Crosby.
Here.
And Advisor Mead.
What to look? I think at least one person sent me something saying they weren't going to be here, so I don't remember who's been excused or not, but we'll get it in the meeting notes.
Okay. All right, and we had two sets of minutes, July 30, 2018, and August 27. Any corrections in either one of those?
I thought we had already accepted the July.
I thought we had to. Is that not true?
No?
No?
We had two sets of June minutes that you approved.
No.
Yeah.
Let's see, I look through. Nothing there.
Yeah, in the August meeting, we approved the June 25.
I'm fine. I move we accept both sets as presented.
I second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes for July 30 and August 27 of 2018 as presented. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Should I abstain because I was only here for half of those meetings?
No, if you checked in, I mean, you showed up, right? Or just,
No, I
was one of
wasn't
them you
here on
weren't
the-
here at all?
I wasn't here on the 27th.
Okay.
Yeah,
we'll
that's
just-
why I think we should have separate motions.
We probably should
Okay.
then. Yeah.
All right, then we'll go for the July 30th minutes. We'll do
I move we accept the July minutes as presented.
all right.
I second.
Okay, been moved and second to accept the July 30th, 2018 minutes. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Okay, now we'll go to the August 27.
I move we accept the August minutes as presented.
I second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the August 27, 2018 minutes as presented. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions or,
I will abstain. I was not at that meeting.
okay. All right.
Where's Barry is here?
I was here.
You want to note that he came in? Okay,
Sorry, I'm late.
that's fine. We didn't start on time anyway.
Okay, good.
And this is the time when, in all of our meetings, where we give opportunity for anybody in the audience for citizen communication on any non-agenda items. Being that there's nobody here, we'll go on. Old business, we have to pick up the continuance of public hearing, the Bloom annexation, and we will open that, and I'm going to read through everything. This is file 18-026 annexation. We'll first call for any abstentions from the Planning Commission. Nothing. Any conflict of interest? Anybody? Okay. Any ex parte contact? Nothing. Call for challenges to the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission or to any individual members. If you testify, you must raise all issues at this hearing. Your comments should state why the application should or should not be approved, or include proposed modifications you believe are necessary for approval according to the standards. If you do not raise specific issues at the final evidentiary hearing or by close of the record, or fail to provide statements or evidence to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue, you will not be able to appeal the decision to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that particular issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Any party has the right to request a continuance of the public hearing, or in the alternative, to have the record remain open. Staff report.
Yeah, so I gave James the night off. I didn't feel like he needed to stay just for a 1-minute summary here. So we've basically been working with the applicant and the applicant's representative and also the transportation engineer that's working on the applicant's behalf, and ODOT also. And right now they're basically it sounds like they're in the process of putting together the TPR findings, which will most likely show no significant effect. And then we'll be getting it back before you on another agenda. I don't know if it will be the October meeting or not at this point. So since the last meeting, the applicant requested by email an actual extension for 245 additional days, which is the most they can request that by ORS. And so at this point, it's basically, they've even said it's an open-ended extension. And at this point, I don't feel like we need to continue it. What we'll most likely do in lieu of that is actually just re-notice the application once we know what date it's going to be on to all the parties and all the agencies that received notice last time, just so that they know it's actually proceeding going forward. So with that, I would recommend you make a motion to approve a continuance for file number 18026, not to extend beyond May 27th, 2019. And that date would be the date that City Council needs to make a decision on it even.
Okay.
And make, you want a motion?
But we assume at this point, we just continue. We kind of basically stop the process. So yes, we can have the motion that's,
Since it's all typed right here.
I know.
I can do this. I make a motion to approve a continuance of file number 18-026 ANN Loom Annexation, not to extend beyond May 27th, 2019, or 245 days.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve a continuance of file 18-026 as worded. Let's take a roll call vote.
Commissioner Carlton.
Yes.
Commissioner Lazowski.
Yes.
Commissioner McLean Wenzel.
Yes.
Commissioner Mobley.
Yes.
Commissioner Abrams.
Yes.
Chairman Crosby.
Yes, motion carries. See you back whenever. All right, the next one, we do have a new public hearing, and this one is judicial, legislative in nature. So we will open that one. Yeah, by continuance, we didn't have to do anything further on this last one as far as closing or anything. It just kind of hangs there. So at 7:11, we will open public hearing for the Development Code modifications to Chapter 1722, 1728, 1780, 1782, and 17102, which is file 18-039, Development Code amendments. I want to get out of that because I don't believe we have to go through all the. Well, they're actually here. I'm looking at my notes. I don't have to do everything. All right. Call for any abstentions from the hearing body? Any conflict of interest? Any ex parte contact? Or any challenges to the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission or any individual members? Okay, if you testify, you must raise all issues at this hearing. Your comments should state why the application should or should not be approved, or include proposed modifications you believe are necessary for approval according to the standards. If you do not raise specific issues at the final evidentiary hearing, or by close of the record, or fail to provide statements or evidence to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue, you will not be able to appeal the decision to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that particular issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Any party has the right to request a continuance of the public hearing, or in the alternative, to have the record remain open. Staff report.
All right, so tonight we're bringing 5 code sections, and then you would be making a recommendation as to whether we bring them to city council next. So these 5 sections were initially brought actually before you guys back in, I think it was November 23rd of 2015. So some of you might remember that. There were more then. I think there were like 10 or something code sections back then. We're wanting to get these through. It's been a few years now. So I want to emphasize that so these are changes from about 3 years ago. We're not trying to make everything perfect at this point. Some of them are pretty minor. The first 3, it's pretty minor changes, and the last 2 has more substantial changes. But again, not really trying to like perfect the code, really more just trying to make it clearer and a little bit more internally consistent. There's just a few things that conflict in the code or just make things confusing, kind of more administratively. So that's sort of the gist of these changes. So what I'm going to do is walk through them one by one, and then I guess we would just do a recommendation for each one afterwards so that we don't have to like kind of come back after going through a whole presentation.
Yeah, and so David Doofman has reviewed all of these code changes for kind of legal standing on it and new case law in case there's anything that's changed. And he did add and subtract some information in these where he didn't find that it was either not pertinent to what we were discussing in the code in each different section or chapter, or where there was more clarity that was needed. So some of these changes in here you'll see are his. And then the only other thing I wanted to recommend is that if you decide to move forward with a recommendation of all 5 of them tonight, we would bring that to City Council as one ordinance. Say if you wanted to only do 3 or 4 of them and get more information on one of them before making a decision tonight, we would probably, that's why Emily was saying we'd still want a decision on each one, because our hopes would be if 4 of the 5 look really good, let's send those forward and adopt them by an ordinance, and then we can come back on the other one. I'd prefer to do that than kind of wait on everything. So if that's good, that's how we would like to proceed.
So this slide just covers the first 2. So looking at the first one, just chapter 17 to 22, notices. Really the only changes here are to increase the noticing distance for a type 2 quasi-judicial notice from 200 feet to 300 feet, and to increase that distance for a type 3 from 300 feet to 500 feet.
And so over the years, we've gotten a lot of comments from people in the community saying that the notice distance is not adequate. And I will say, I didn't fully research noticing distances, but the other 2 communities I did work in prior to Sandy, the noticing distances were much greater than what we have. And I do believe for a type 3 decision, before you guys, 300 feet is not very far. So I think 500 feet. I think this is kind of a case where we're taking a shot at what we think is the appropriate distance, and then if we still get a lot of communication that it's not adequate, we might in the future look at increasing it even further. The further we increase that distance, keep in mind the more money it costs the city and the more time it takes for Rebecca to send all those notices. So this will be increasing some of the time it takes to send notices, and probably we'll start receiving more comments as well. So we'll take up some more staff time. But it really is a proposal based on feedback that we've received since I've been working here, of that they don't think the distances are quite adequate enough.
Well, a couple quick comments. First of all, the distances, whatever the distance is, the right thing to do is the right thing to do. So we don't want people to come in and say, I didn't know, because they were 301 foot out. So I would suggest, if it's possible, to consider either 2 thoughts. One, is the value or not of inserting the word minimum. What I'm thinking of is to allow you, the director, some discretion to, the code says you have to do this. But if you look at it and you go, you look at this circle and, there's some common sense to apply, that it would be okay for you to decide to send notices outside that distance if you felt it made sense. I'd like to see you have that discretion. And so wording in the code that gives you that discretion would be my proposal. And I don't know if by just putting a minimum in there would do that. That's a David question. Or if necessary, insert a sentence that just says notices may be sent beyond this distance at the discretion of the director. So, remember, I'm a mathematician guy, and I'm suspicious of any number that ends in a zero. And then if it ends in 2 zeros, I get more suspicious. And if it ends in 3 zeros, I get really suspicious. You know, and that's was wonderful when we were in here dealing with the marijuana stuff a while back when, 1,000 feet of a school. What's magic about 1,000?
So
I mean, you put some number down, but, something's 999 and you're dead.
So do you
know
think
what I'm saying?
172220J on the second page, do you think that's what that's, how would you read that? Do you think that's what that's trying to say that we could do?
17, 20, 22J, top of the page.
Yeah,
2.
top of the page.
Yeah, that would be fine.
So I don't believe that language is actually, I think that's in type 3 and type 4 hearings, but I don't believe it's in the type 2 quasi-judicial notice section for some
Well,
reason.
it's in the type 3 section, so I just like to see be able to do it regardless of type,
Right.
You have it under 22.30C. You have similar language.
So just add it to the type 2.
Yeah, just get added to type 2 and make an E there. And the only other comment I had going through, and this is just really consistency more than anything else. At the top of the third page, there is, you've inserted the number 7. I think the change here is 7 was written out, but now you're just inserting 7 as a number.
Yeah.
Okay, so, but there, we don't say it's calendar days versus work days. And what I found in kind of reading through this part of the code is that sometimes you say calendar days and sometimes you don't. So at the end of the day, if we mean calendar days, it may sound like one simple word, but somebody's going to come in and say work days. So I would just say maybe just do a search through anytime you got days. And, I've just, for example, I'm just looking at the next one we're going to look at. And, you have calendar days in that one in the middle of the very first page. At the top of that, we're into the next one for a second, there's 12 days, but then you're deleting 12 calendar days. So it's just really minor, but I would just think a global look at calendar would pick that up.
Yeah, I think, and I might, correct me if I'm wrong on this, if anybody knows better than I do, but I think somewhere in the code, and I'm not saying this is adequate, but somewhere in the code I think it does say that if it doesn't specify calendar, it means work. I think it's in like the definition section or something, but I do agree with you. I think just saying it makes more sense, because then you don't have to refer to that earlier code section and know that's the case.
Well, you make a good point. I mean, if what you say is correct, then you do want to say calendar if you mean calendar,
Yeah, we
because
want
otherwise
calendar
it's
in
work.
Yeah, we definitely want calendar.
And if this is in the next one, but just since you brought it up as an example, if you look at 172810 under A, you're actually adding, you say within 12 days of, and then if you look right below it, you're deleting a part of it that has 12 calendar days.
Yeah, that was
That's my point is.
that was David actually.
Yeah.
I don't want to throw him under the bus with that.
Yeah, I knew that was actually in here.
That was actually his.
But see, there's
change.
an example, if that's
Right.
truly, you actually have changed it
Yeah.
to 12 work days from calendar
Right.
days, if that's truly the case. So, I mean, this is all detail, and that's what lawyers are
Yeah.
paid to figure out detail, but I know Ron and I are, we're pretty good proofreaders, and we throw rocks at you with little stuff.
No, they're good points.
Yeah, the definition says a day or days shall mean calendar days unless working days are specified.
Oh, okay, so it's opposite of what I thought. Okay.
But it is confusing because it does say calendar days.
I think just calling it out is the best way to do it.
Yeah, the
Right.
best way to do it,
Right.
yeah, is if you just did a search throughout, you can pick it up.
I agree.
And the only other thing that I found, and this is just on all of them, just make it once, for review, I don't know, it looks to me like you did it in track changes mode. And normally, I'm used to track changes mode is you can set, how deletions are shown and how
Yeah,
additions are
yeah.
shown. And usually there's a color there. And so like all deletions are the same color, or all additions are the same color. And as I go through, it's just like 3 or 4 different colors used in the same one. I don't know how that ended up that way within Word.
It's 4
But
different people
it really helps the
making
Four
reader.
different people giving input.
Yeah,
We
well,
each have
well,
color.
but that, when it comes to us, somebody's got to sit down and do the clerical on it, I guess. So at the end of the day, the clerical part is, it's easier to review if everything to be deleted is in red, everything to be added is in blue as an example, and/or et cetera, as opposed to,
right.
because otherwise, color means nothing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
it's
used
actually
to the
more
bold and
confusing.
strike.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You might
so
as well just strike it out.
we can look at that when we do it next time. It is because it's 4 different commenters on it. though.
Yeah, I mean, when you go to
Yeah.
city council, as an example, you might want to clean that up a little.
Yeah,
bit.
that's a good point.
Yeah.
I think there's actually a mode you can switch that says all track changes are in the same color. So I think that's all we had.
Well, I know, pardon me for a second, but I use Word 2003. You know, that way I keep Bill Gates's income lower than it would be otherwise.
Not much lower.
And by the way, you can install it, and you don't have to get it all checked, and you don't have to worry about all the updates and all the rest. And, you know, it puts words on the page. Man, it's great.
I thought you were gonna say word perfect, but.
Well, I had, I mean, I got WordPerfect installed. I mean, I can do it.
We don't do
You
it.
know?
Guys, let's-
Yeah, but you know, actually, the other day, it wasn't too long ago, I upgraded from Word 2000 to 2003, so I thought you'd be happy that I moved from 2000 to 2003. But at the end of the day, it's just words on a piece of paper, and I'm just used to the formatting part. And I know you can format track changes to make it consistent, so it's just, it's clerical. But
Okay.
I don't have any other concerns on that one.
I have a question on 172230 A. We've struck out at least 45 days.
Mm-hmm.
So it just is no, it just before the first evidentiary hearing. Is it that worked for you guys? I mean,
Yeah, so actually the state requires 35 days now, so our code was not compliant with state law. And I talked to David about this a long time ago, and he agreed just to cite the OAR. Because if
Okay.
this, I'm just gonna,
Yeah.
if the state changes
then it,
the days again,
Change it.
it would just say,
You're
okay,
just
we're
punting, you're
just
just punting to the state law.
Correct,
You're
exactly.
doing, and the fact 35 is not there.
And then under 172240, number G, at the end there's an extra and at the end of G.
What's that?
At under G,
Uh-huh.
Top
it
page
says
3.
reasonable cost and,
I think that's introducing.
That's
Yeah.
introducing H.
Yeah.
but all the rest of them just stand on themselves.
Oh.
The notice shall be provided.
Yeah.
They're just,
Yeah.
God, it's not consistent.
It's not consistent.
Well, all the rest of them, all the rest of them end in a semicolon.
No, so it's a list, so it's saying that all these have to be provided, including H. That's how it's reading.
To the end is for the last thing.
Mhm.
Correct.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why wouldn't each one just end in a period?
Well, like when you do commas, comma, 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 and the last.
Correct.
one.
So if you do a comma, semicolon, 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 and it's an and list, then it has to have an and at the end.
Got it.
That's how most of our code is, our municipal code is laid out this way.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty minimal changes on this section. And a lot of it was actually David. I mean, it was.
Yeah,
his-
most of it is.
When we all talked about
Here's the
these, do you want to have motions on each of these separately as we go?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Actually, yeah, that's a good point Emily just pointed out to me, is that, so when you're looking through this, anything that's in red,
Well, not on the last. I think our colors changed.
No,
No,
you
it's
have a
blue.
random color generator and, you know.
So most of
are
the-
colorblind.
most of the red comments are David, though, throughout these documents.
Oh.
Just to let you know that.
Good to
Yeah.
know.
Anyway, the point is, my thought was just cleaned up before it goes to city council.
Yeah, no, I agree. We can do that.
So you want a feedback from us on each one as we go along,
Mhm.
okay? And do you need a motion, or do you just need a?
I mean, just as a recommendation,
Consensus,
right?
yeah.
A recommendation to.
We did that through motion.
With the
Motion to
changes
refer
or
it to city
whatever.
council.
I mean, the motion, I think,
One
would
by-
come at the end, noting what chapters you want to forward to them and which chapters you want more feedback on before forwarding.
Okay. well,
So right now,
that's
we
what I
know,
was asking.
right now, we
Do
know
one
this
at a
section's
time.
going to council.
But,
Yeah, if-
but they're going to council with the corrections as we note them. That's
Correct.
Okay.
Right,
Okay,
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So we'll make that motion at the end of the hearing.
okay,
So you don't have to make 5 separate motions, yeah.
yeah.
All right.
Okay, so the second one is also pretty minimal. David did do some like kind of legalese writing in here, but so 1728, the appeals. Really the big change here is to increase the type 3 appeal period to 12 days, which is what the type 1 and 2 is. So just to make those consistent. It didn't really make sense to us to only have that at 10 days, the other one at 12. It made us have to kind of rethink, you know, how long is this appeal period? For a type 3 to probably give it the 2 extra calendar days seems reasonable, so.
Yeah, this one's actually been interesting to me the whole time in the 8 years I've worked here, is that we actually give more time for an appeal on a type 2, which is typically not as big of a decision and was not usually made with any like variances or anything, than we give for a larger decision before planning commission. So I've always thought it should have been reversed, if anything, but I think, as Emily pointed out, just to make it clear, I think just having them the same time period is best.
You think that's a result of time for mailing, like in a type 2 when there's no hearing? In a type 3, maybe the presumption is concerned citizens are already aware of it?
I don't know, could be. I mean, we did run this by David, and he thought that it would be best just to make it the same as well, just to reduce the chance of error, basically, by staff.
I agree with that.
Is the 12, anything until 12 referred to in state law at all, or is that just our discretion?
I think it's just our discretion, I believe.
The only thing I was thinking of was 14 versus 12. Only I'm thinking of is how things set up. You could, at the end of the day, you know, work days is important to some extent, and you could get 2 weekends involved depending on when you did it. And, you know, if you had 14 versus 12, you ensure, you know, essentially in practicality 10 work days. So that's.
I don't think staff has a strong feeling one or the other. If you want to change the number of days, I don't think there's going to be any issue with it.
Okay,
There's nothing significant about 12 that I know of or that I'm aware of.
It doesn't end in 0, though. It doesn't end in 0.
That's right.
Not
But the
anymore.
10 they got rid of ended in a 0.
I mean, I will say,
Go to 10, I guess.
I will say, my years working here, no one's ever, or it's never come to my attention that 12 days is a
Problem.
is a burden. So I don't know. There is that, but I don't know. Maybe
Why make it longer?
Yeah, we'll make it.
I don't know.
Stick with 12?
The whole fine with me. I was just pointing out the.
Mm-hmm.
The other question I had was, I'm sure there's some legal reason to delete the very last clause there, B on the 3rd page. Is it just assume that majority is how things pass? Or
Exactly, the majority.
Assuming anything in here in red is David, right?
This one,
that was a
yeah.
David thing, yeah.
So he's probably saying it's redundant.
It is, that's just our rules, how well we run all the meetings, so.
It seemed to me to be redundant unless something else requires a supermajority.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't answer that one, to be honest, why he took that out, but
Probably redundant. Okay, well, anybody got comments on that?
I had a question on 172820, where we add on A, at least, shall contain at least all of the following. Is an appeal ever not accepted because it doesn't contain all of the required items? I've seen some appeals are pretty thin. That's just sort of not a critique of any of the language here, but just a question.
well, let's see here. So identification of the decisions sought, obviously you have to have that.
Well, just the phrase, at least all of the following, doesn't even quite make
Well,
sense.
why is that? I assume this is the David comment?
Yep.
All the things in red on this.
And
one.
so I mean, I tend to defer to the attorney, that's why you're paying the big bucks, but I'm not, why is at least in there? I mean, you want to have all of them.
And you could-
Yeah.
I
Right,
guess
and
you
what
could
else
imply
would
as
you,
could,
what else would you add if you're not gonna mention what you would add? Because they'd always be free to add whatever you wanted in an
You know,
appeal.
you might ask David if at least is needed, but at the end of the day,
Yeah, we can
if
ask him
David
that.
feels that's what's needed to clarify,
I can see where it's saying you have to have these pieces and then anything else that you want to add as well.
Yeah.
It reads,
It opens the door.
yeah.
That's true, it
Yeah,
does
but-
imply that you don't
the
have
door's
to
not
have
closed if
just
you don't
these
put it
Yes.
at least either.
But for people who aren't
Yeah,
familiar
at least
with
the
it,
following.
this lets them know that they need to have more.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, we can ask David, though. I'd rather get it right
I think
than.
three of us are saying it's fine with the at least, but.
Yeah, I
doesn't
don't have
matter.
that.
That's
problem.
fine. It's minor.
I was just kinda curious, cause I've seen some appeals like on one piece of paper that aren't very robust. But I guess you could probably fit all 6 of these items on one piece of paper anyway.
Yeah, I think-
Yeah.
I was just curious if that ever occurs where you can't accept an appeal or something if it's incomplete.
My guess is that if it didn't have all these, you could deny the appeal. Now, whether you'd want to or not is a different question.
Mhm.
Because then that person might be able to challenge you in court that you didn't hear their appeal and you're being prejudiced or something like that.
Right, yeah.
But on a technicality, I think you would have to have all these, yeah. I don't know.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's where that at least says that you can do whatever, you can present whatever you want in an appeal, but you have to have these things.
I think that's what it's trying to say,
Yes.
yeah.
That makes sense.
And it doesn't say you will only accept those. Okay. And Daisy, feel free to just, I know we're in a public hearing, but.
Be watching a movie, hell, don't disturb her.
Okay? So that one, just summarizing that one, will stay as is?
I think adding 12 calendar after on A,
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
I noted that from Dawn's earlier comments.
yeah.
Okay. And you guys don't need clarity on the at least?
No.
We're good with that? Okay.
No.
Change it, please. All right, so these next two are about setbacks. And so the first one, chapter 1780, additional setbacks on collector and arterial streets. Right now, it includes a list of our minor arterials and collector streets and then residential minor arterial. This list tends to change, so similar to what we previously did in the last one with that 45 days. Really, we just want to kind of refer this to the most updated, most recently adopted transportation system plan. So we are going to be updating our transportation system plan soon. We got a grant back in June. And so we just want to refer to that rather than list them all so that we don't have to continually update every time something changes. And then the only other change, so it's mostly just a deletion of all the street names specifically. And then the other one is that we wanted to exempt the central business district from these regulations. So these are saying you need a 20-foot setback, but in the central business district, we actually want kind of more street frontage. It would only apply to probably a couple of the streets, the side streets. I think like Meinig is one on here. So there's not actually that many that it would even apply to, but.
Could apply to Proctor and Pioneer.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think they're major arterials, not minor, but anyway.
So on Pleasant, for example, you know, technically a future commercial street to some extent, but has residences. You know, you could build a residence then right up next to the sidewalk.
Well, Pleasant would be zone C1, so you could only build multifamily.
Right next to the sidewalk, though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Then we're okay with it. I mean, that, my point is that things like Pleasant, which is C1, which right now is a mixture of, right now it's a mixture of housing and commercial. We hope it to be more commercial, but, you know, we just have a duplex thing going in there, you know, on the very west end.
Mm-hmm.
The fiveplex.
Fiveplex, whatever it is, yeah. It's all, I mean, it's stacked in the back or whatever, but, you know, at the end of the day, you know, do we want, I would say duplex, for lack of a better term. Okay, let's just say we have a proposal to come in, put in a duplex, you know, they're right next to the street, that it's gonna affect parking and all the rest, you know, in a residence versus business, so.
We had that one set back at 10 feet to match the C1. So that one didn't even.
I mean, I think if you wanted to regulate that, you'd probably want to do that in the, what is it, chapter 1740? Which is the central business district, but I don't think you'd want to do it in the collector and arterial street section in this section.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I just saw that one, see, I didn't, for example, Highway 26 is not listed. You know, our two main streets you know, Proctor, et cetera, aren't listed, but Pleasant is. And if Pleasant's listed, I'm just, as a future thing, I was wondering if there's any conflicts there. Because I know if you made that pure commercial, yeah, you'd want the business right up next to the sidewalk, you'd want it to look like downtown and all the rest of that, but, you know, that probably isn't gonna happen in our lifetime. But, you know, we're still permitting residential to be built there.
Yeah, this code section actually has a lot of issues. If you read the intent, it actually says development on arterial or collector. And then when you go back down to the applicability, it never mentions any arterials. It just mentions minor arterials. So right from the get-go, when this code section was written back in the 80s or early 90s, it had big flaws because it never actually mentioned any of the arterials in town, such as the highway. It just started off with minor arterials. So I think Proctor and Pioneer and the rest of the Highway 26 should have been mentioned in here according to the intent of this code chapter, but it was never actually written in there.
So is there a way we have easy access to the TSP where we could see right now?
Yeah, I could pull it up.
The TSP. You know, what I think just would be value to the public or to us or anything would be, you know, how accessible is the TSP? If you're just looking for a list of streets with their designations, which might be just one piece of paper, you know, that's what this is providing, you know, just a quick reference. So I just think the quick reference is the key thing.
I do like taking the list of streets out, though.
Yeah, I don't mind any problem.
It's handy when you have to refer to the, dig up the TSP to find the answer, but in the code, I know of at least one jurisdiction that's still using engineering standards from the 80s because they took the then current code and, or stated the practice and wrote it into their code and they've never changed. So to the extent we can just cite the source, I think I'm in favor of that.
So we have a map, but is there actually a list?
No.
Make it easier. I would suggest you use
Pleasant Street, as you'll see, is not a collector on our current TSP.
Right. So my suggestion would be just valuable to still have a list like this that's easily available somewhere.
I think
So you don't have to
what
interpret a
what they're
map.
saying is that the list is gonna be changing, and so if you're trying to,
Well, it's just part of the TSP. I mean, the TSP, you're supposed to interpret a map to figure out where, if you have a collector street or not. It's just as easy to also show it on a list just like this.
I think the hard part about that, though, is as you'll notice if you look at the map here, some streets, let's take Sandy Heights for an example, or actually I'll even grab a better one. Yeah, let's look at McCormick right by the post office there. West of McCormick and Wolf Drive, it's not a collector any longer. Or if you look at Wolf Drive, south of the intersection with McCormick, it's not a collector anymore. So I think if you list the streets, I think there could be a lot of confusion. If you look at DeBarco also, there's actually two different classifications, one being an arterial and one being a residential minor arterial. And so if you list those streets in a list, there could be or could lead to some confusion on which portions of those streets are which classification, I think.
Yeah, following DeBarco through is interesting. It changes everywhere.
Yeah, it's really weird.
Which I don't know, to me that begets a question, by the way, if it's, you know, is it really a major arterial? Oh, no, it's not a minor arterial when you go past this intersection, but everything's going like this.
I mean, if you actually just go east or south of, what's this road called? I can never remember the name of it, that little short one. Wright Court or Rich Court, or however you pronounce it. Pretty close to your house, Jerry. If you go just south of that, and then as you're kind of coming down where the Tickle Creek Trail passes, there's actually some houses with direct driveway access to DeBarco. There's like a couple duplexes. So by definition of a residential minor arterial, it actually should be labeled green in that section, but obviously in the current TSP it's not. So we're going to be kind of exploring all that when we're going through our TSP revision and saying this map is not entirely accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems to me like possibly because of differences in topography or whatever, and because we wanted certain code sections to apply on certain areas of DeBarco, we colored it either blue or green or red. And at the end of the day, the road looks the same when you go through there, and its function is the same.
I can tell you what probably happened. since I was around here, looking at the green sections of DeBarco, when we created the minor residential arterial, DeBarco was the poster child. And what's green there is what existed at that time of DeBarco, for the most part. And the others, the blue sections were added after we made it.
Right.
It just looks like the map didn't follow through on what was originally set.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, we talked about this, at some point in time, if DeMarco does connect to 26 on the east end, i.e. Vista Loop South gets built, then you can skip downtown and you can just turn off there and you can just, and that's, I may have saying it before, I mean, that's, people figured that out in a heartbeat.
I can tell you they
Yeah,
already.
I
I was gonna
mean,
say, we
it's just
already-
another way to get around downtown Sandy traffic, you know, people figured that out. And, so, you know, that, I just, it's just, this is a good map. I mean, I find it interesting, just look at a Barco, it looks like it has been functions in several places.
I like the idea of taking the street names out of it and referring back to the TSP. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Question I kind of have is, and I tried to write it down here, so if we're referring back to that and a street gets redesignated, are they grandfathered in? For example, if the street that I lived on was just a everyday street, now it's deemed as a major, or right? And then I went to do some type of renovation, remodeling, could I go back and say, this is how it was, or, you know, does the code now apply? What would trigger it, I guess? The redesignation.
So you're saying the house is existing?
Or business, you know, I'm just saying in terms of the setbacks.
Well, we wouldn't let you build, I mean, the house would be an existing non-conforming structure at that point. But we wouldn't allow you to build an addition within that 20-foot section. So the existing building would just remain, obviously, as non-conforming structure, but if you want to do an addition, we wouldn't let you encroach into the new setback requirement.
Or if I did, what about if somebody was doing a remodeling to said building?
Within the
About-
existing footprint?
Yeah,
Yeah, we would allow that.
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, we want to, how I look at existing non-conforming uses or structures is we want to see, especially structures, we want to see them be remodeled and rebuilt. We don't want them to become derelict, so we try to work with the landowners to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good point, though.
Okay. Any other comments or input on 1728?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, wait, 1728?
1780.
82. Oh, we already moved on. My notes.
That's kind of a one-pager.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll be even shorter now.
It's gonna be a half a pager now.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Ron. I mean, you can only interpret the map, but, I guess, we'll look at it later when we get into more development and stuff, but the map does look like it begets some questions.
It does seem that the more we clarify and clean up and condense this, so that, because we have only a limited amount of staff, and we want our staff to be freed up to do all the new things, not to have to go back and update the paperwork for the sake of updating.
I mean, my guess is that this probably hasn't been updated in, I don't know for sure, but probably 30 years.
Right.
And the TSP gets updated about every 8 to 10.
Exactly.
So
Well, we
That's
started
better
trying to
place to
update
keep
this
track
3 years
of it.
ago, and we're here
This is
today
full of
trying to
Yeah.
finish it, so.
Yeah,
it's-
exactly.
Yeah, you can have
Gives you an
Get it
idea.
done.
I mean,
Yeah.
The question is, how do kids get back and forth? You always have
Okay.
this problem already.
All right. Then we move on.
Urban forestry.
Oh, it shows up
It's
there.
Okay.
That's weird.
So the next one is 1782, so special setbacks on transit streets. This one's been somewhat of a nightmare for staff to enforce or whatever, I guess.
Administer.
Administer, that's the word, that's the word I was looking for. So my understanding, actually, you could probably speak more to it, but my understanding is that this existed prior to 1790, our design standards, and once those were created, those were supposed to sort of take over for the commercial. And that's why there's, at the top, this chapter is only applicable to residential development. That's why that's put in there. But if you actually read the text of it, it really speaks more to commercial. It even mentions commercial. It talks about, like, you know, large entrances and things like that that really make no sense. So most of what is most of the changes here are really just removing all of those references to commercial structures and uses. So pretty much deleting almost all of it. And then just focusing on kind of the building orientation for residences.
And this one is an important chapter in the sense that if Planning Commission and City Council ultimately desires that residential development adjacent to collector or arterial streets are going to be oriented to those streets, to make this very clear for staff on how to administer it, because we get a lot of confused and or angry people that buy houses. We have a couple right now, actually, I'll tell you, that buy houses along these streets, and you can't park on the streets, but you have to have doors going out to the streets. So there's I think what we're attempting to do tonight, and what we have before you tonight, is to clean this up to the best of our abilities quickly. But I think that this section needs to be looked at in more depth going into the future. And what I'd like to do is update it with what we have it proposed, and hopefully if you guys want to make some additions or changes, that'd be great. And then come back to you with this, with some more code iterations and look at it in more depth. Because I do think it's a bigger discussion than probably what we'll get into tonight. But how it's currently written, it's just, like Emily put, I think that's precisely it. It's a nightmare to try to administer.
So you still want to do the quick fix?
I'd prefer to do a quick fix, because I think that's better than just leaving it as it currently sits.
At least we'll eliminate some of the confusion.
There is a ton of confusion on this section. As Emily pointed out, if you go to the third page when it starts talking about exemptions, all of those lists, all of those items there are actually commercial uses.
Yeah.
So we really start, and people have laughed at us on this one, and I say, well, sorry, it is what it is. So, you know, and on page 1, if you look, we struck out, this is only applicable to residential development. However, in the applicability section, we then added in, this chapter applies to all residential development, so we wouldn't be applying it to commercial any longer.
So would it be possible, is this the kind of thing that we could do the quick fix tonight, but maybe put on a calendar, like a work session, that we come an hour early and have a discussion about it?
That's what I think we would highly recommend, yeah.
Yeah, that seems like a good solution.
All of this stuff that does talk about commercial, is it repeat from somewhere else that it does apply? Or, I mean, if we're getting rid of this commercial part, I understand that, but is there something similar to that somewhere else in the commercial code?
1790 should more or less cover it, I think.
Well, that's what I would then suggest. I mean, when you come to us, we do a work session. I mean, first of all, make sure anything that we've deleted here, you don't want to somehow keep and put in 1790.
That was my question too, is especially for the orientation of the parking to the side or behind, you know, if we're taking that out. I was
That's
trying to.
definitely in 1790.
Okay.
Yeah, and right now, because of that clause on the first page that says this chapter is only applicable to residential development, we haven't been applying this to, like, Tractor Supply Store, for instance. We didn't apply this because it says right there that you can't. So even if 1790 has some stuff that could be borrowed from this section to make 1790 even better, the last 5 or 6 years since we changed this, we have not been using this code section. So like on Goodwill, Tractor Supply, any of the new commercial, none of this has been applied to that. So
I like Hollis's idea to go through for another work session and clean up, because I kind of hate, in one hand, the quick patch to do it. I mean, we just got done, I'm trying to remember the development where we put the front doors where they're really not going to use them. just
Yeah.
to make it look pretty going by.
Marshall?
I mean, I would be ticked off too if I had a house where I had to do that for everybody driving by, so I don't know what the answer is, but
Yeah.
if we could table that and move it up somewhere, and probably make your life easier too.
I think it's gonna be a TSB discussion too about whether we allow parking on those streets or not, because I think that's one of the biggest complaints that I actually understand, like, it makes sense to me. We're saying, oh, you can't park here, but you need to face it, because we're, you know, trying to create this pedestrian environment, but then there's nothing to walk to, so I think it's a bigger,
Yeah.
a much bigger issue, but
Front
for
door to
now,
nowhere.
really trying to just
Keeping the
make it
parking
clearer.
off makes sense, but anyway.
I mean, what I would recommend if it was, it's not my decision, it's your guys' decision, but if I was to seek, or give you guys a little advice on this, is to adopt what we have or with modifications as you guys see fit. And then, in the meantime, if we get subdivisions where this is a reality, we'll just be very honest with them that if you guys don't want this, just bring it as a variance to you in the meantime, before we get it before you with a bigger work session. I mean, that's what we've basically been doing on every subdivision anyways.
I know,
It's just
but
that this way it doesn't read really wonky like it has.
The other question I had in regards to the building orientation is in a multi-unit orientation. How to do that? Does all the doors have to face forward, or one of them, you know, to, you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah,
Which one are you reading, or?
Well, no, I'm just saying on the
Oh.
orientation, building shall have a primary entrance. So, buildings, so again, if it's a multi-unit,
Something weird, like
Multi-building.
if you had a duplex,
Yeah.
and one of them had a door facing this way, and just for grins, the other duplex, the door opened up here into a driveway. Now, why you designed that, I don't know, but.
We had one of those.
You actually have one of those? The
We
point,
have one that's
Something
being
like that.
proposed, yeah. So it's not that
so
far.
the point is, to all, what he's saying, to all
Well,
doorways, to all livable
the one
units,
on
gotta
Pleasant.
face the street.
yeah.
The one on Pleasant with the building behind, it opened to a parking area.
The ones in the back did.
Yeah. So that would be the example of a multi-building thing,
Right, but what if it was?
one behind the other.
Yeah, but what if it was right not on the street?
But Dawn, your point's well taken, because we actually have a proposal that it's a really weird design, but one of the doors is actually facing the street, right? And then the other two doors are like on the side of the building or something?
Yeah, are you talking about it hasn't come through yet,
Yeah.
especially,
Yeah.
yeah.
But it says that building shall have a primary entrance, so I guess that would be, as long as they have one.
I mean, I guess for Sandy Place Apartments, the building that was fronting on Sandy Heights Street, we did ask that all the units had entrances there, and then they asked for the variance, and so they are internally facing, but we have like the patios back there with
Mhm.
doors still.
Well, the point is, you can make a simple little word change depending on the intent of the commission. They wanted to make sure that on a duplex, all the doors face the street. You could replace the word dwelling with living unit or something, you know,
Mhm.
because the multiplex is a dwelling. Okay, but it might have to be made up of 2, 3, 4 living units. And if you wanted all those living units to have a door that faced the street, then just change the word dwelling to something that you're comfortable with, that means
Catches them all.
living, I use a living unit, I'm not sure that's the right thing to do. At the end of the day, you have to have a glossary, you know.
It, my summary is, if this makes your life easier for now, for the patch,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm behind it.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely takes care of that. And
Yeah, it does, and Emily and I were talking about this before we put it up on the website, that we realize this is not like a great code still, it's just better than what we have, and we honestly just didn't have the time to like research and bring forth like a lot of different ideas that we could all look at, which I'd love to do.
With all our free time.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, if we simplify some things, then you'll have more time.
I think part of the problem too is, you know, clearly we've waited since November 23rd of 2015 to get this back, and so it's, you know, we get busy and we don't have time, and it's, you know, we want to kind of get it through as much as we can,
Well, I thi-
and knowing we want to come back to it, but
Yeah.
knowing that we might not be able to do that right away either. Because there's, like I said, there's about 5 other code sections from that same work session that we'll be bringing to you hopefully before the end of the year. Also with, I don't know the extent of the changes on those, if you know, Kelly. but-
Well, I just know that if we're here to serve our community, and if I look at all the stuff that's coming out of this, proposed to be deleted, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that makes our community so upset with government, you know? It's just all these things is like so cumbersome, and that's, you know, that's what I hear from people in the community, so I think the more lean you make it, the better, as long as it.
Right.
Yeah, my concern was is that the stuff that's deleted isn't necessarily bad. I mean, which there was put there for a purpose. And if it is then picked up in 1790, great. But my concern is that if it's deleted here, though it be not applicable, and if it has value, there should be a review back to 1790 that could be part of that same work session that would take some of this stuff and
Make sure it's
put
all
it in
covered there.
1790, because
Yeah.
Okay, any other comments on?
I only had one comment, probably tails over to the next one more than this one, but because on this one, people chose to insert comments, now it's printed out with the comments, it's a Word thing. Now, you can print it out with no comments, but on the next one, particularly on trees, there's a lot of comments which are internal battering back and forth.
Oh, we intended to leave those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was
Do you really
intentional.
want that to be part of the record is my point.
On this one,
It's
we
kind of
did.
internal staff battering.
Yeah, on this one
and-
we did actually.
It's
We,
show discussion, really.
yeah. So we actually did leave the comments that we wanted to leave. Whether that's
Okay.
a good idea or not, I don't know, but
Okay,
that's,
I'm just pointing out, yeah, if you want
Yeah, that
that
is-
part of the record, but.
that is how we
that's
did it
all
on this.
fine. But at the end of the day, it makes printing it more difficult and reading it, but it's okay.
yeah, we did actually delete the ones we didn't want people to see, just so you know.
Well, the previous one, then delete, you can delete
I don't
the,
think there were many.
but then there's the one Words puts in, like your formatting
Selective.
that you can't delete, you know?
Yeah.
Thank Bill for helping us out.
So any more comments on 82?
No?
Because this next one's the meat of the discussion
This
tonight.
is
I
what
believe.
you've all been waiting for.
Yeah, just do it, what the heck.
We got a half an hour, according to Ron.
I got a half an hour according to Ron.
We can do it.
We'll see.
Surprised, you can do anything given
Weird,
the.
it changed up there, but not on yours.
I don't know.
But no, I think probably my half an hour thing, or whatever we have on it is how much is honestly, how much in the weeds you want to get, and what are the, I think the intent we're all behind on it, it's just, yeah.
So I'll let Emily go through this one if you guys want to. She was the main one to work on this section. I will say there's a lot of different philosophy and ideas out there around trees and preservation of those. And there's a lot of practice that we've seen that hasn't worked in the city of Sandy. We were just looking at a few today, actually.
Yeah.
So I'll let her kind of lead the way on this one, but after she only has a few slides to get through on kind of the code information, and then she has a ton of pictures to show you. So you just give her a few minutes, and then we can kind of talk after that. That'd be great.
So I will just preface it again, and keeping in mind that we're not trying to make this code perfect. I think this is one that, per Hollis's previous suggestion, really needs to come back to a work session. What we would like to do is make it a little bit more internally consistent with the rest of our code and a little bit clearer. So there's certain things that just aren't spelled out very clearly in 17102, but are things that we still can kind of require and ask for anyway, and so just to make it a little bit clearer for us and for applicants, it's kind of the intent. So this is a long quote here. This is just taken directly out of our code from section 179210C, which is our landscaping section. And it's defining significant trees, saying they should be preserved to the greatest extent practicable and integrated into the design of a development. And then it defines them as trees that are 25 inches or greater circumference, measured at breast height, which is the 4.5 feet above grade. So that translates approximately to like a 7.9 inch DBH. I've been rounding it up to about 8 inch DBH tree. So this code is saying that 8 inches or greater DBH trees should be preserved to the greatest extent practicable. And then it further says that they can be considered preserved if there's no cutting, filling, or compaction of the soil, that takes place between the trunk of the tree and the area 5 feet outside of the tree's drip line. And that any retained tree should have tree protection fencing located 5 feet outside of the drip line. So this is our landscaping section of the code as it currently exists and as we currently enforce it. When you go into, so now it's not changing. Did it change on your screens at all?
No.
Okay. How about?
No.
When I can do this. Hold on 1 second. Technical difficulties. I'm just gonna reopen it, that usually works. Is that changing now? Yeah, it's changing.
Yep. Presentations.
I wonder why we bury things about 10 layers down inside of the filing system.
I can follow theirs, so it's good.
I'm just hoping since we relaunch it, it'll actually work correctly this time.
Well, when 2003 comes up,
There we go.
that.
There we go, I think it's gonna work now.
Okay.
Quick question, just on Forester. You define the height, 4.5 feet, which is DBH, definition of DBH, and then you have above grade. And so what's your definition of above grade as it differs from the DBH definition on the first page of 17102? I mean, DBH is a very well-defined term in forestry.
Yeah.
To say above grade in one place, to say above the ground on the uphill
On the
side in
hillside,
another
yeah.
place, it's just, you were looking for consistency, so there's just a little something there.
I don't know why this doesn't just say diameter.
I
per
don't know,
side.
yeah, I don't know what grade would mean in that case, but.
Yeah, I mean, my assumption is that that's what this means, because it's 4.5 feet.
Yeah, actually, from a forestry standpoint, if you had a tree on the center side of the hill, the way we normally do it is you actually split the middle of the tree and you kind of go up. You don't favor the uphill side or the downhill side, you just kind of go up.
Mhm.
You kind of say the base of the tree is, halfway.
Somewhere
and then go up.
between.
But
Yeah.
If you're ever a forester and you're actually measuring, doing inventory.
I don't know. So in section 17102, where we ask, like, we list the requirements, or 1710230, where we're listing the requirements for what an applicant would have to submit. We only ask for a site plan that details the location and species of trees 11 inches DBH or greater to be retained. So we still ask for trees 8 inches and greater DBH because we have to still enforce that part of the code that says to preserve them to the greatest extent practicable. So one thing we wanted to do is kind of clear that up and just here actually ask for trees 6 inches or greater DBH, because that's what our definition of a tree is, 6 inches or greater. And also for our flood and slope hazard overlay, we need to know trees that are 6 inches or greater. So it just makes it clearer across the board. A tree is 6 inches or greater if that's how we're defining it, and that's how the definition section of our code does define it. So say a tree is 6 inches or greater DBH, that's what we need to show mapped. And then 1710250 is also in conflict with our landscaping section of the code, in that it says that trees identified for retention shall be protected by a protective fencing placed no less than 10 horizontal feet from the outside edge of the trunk, whereas the other one said 5 feet beyond drip line. So those are two inconsistencies, and we're able to enforce the 5 feet beyond drip line, but this doesn't make it very clear, saying it, place no less than at least. So I believe the language that we kind of went with was to do 5 feet beyond drip line to maintain consistency with 1792, but to also specify no less than 10 feet. So that's for the case of, say, a mitigation tree that was recently planted. It might not actually, it might only be like 3 feet wide or something. So 5 feet beyond that drip line would only be 8 feet, but really that tree is going to grow much bigger. And so going, at least 10 is kind of giving it a little bit of a buffer. So the biggest intention is just to bring 17102 into conformance with 1792 and other sections of our code, like the definitions. But ultimately, really, to better protect retention trees and mitigation trees and trees in general. I wanted to just include this little graphic because we are going with 5 feet beyond drip line. That is what our code currently says. There are other options. So when we do have a tree plan come through, we occasionally will hire a third-party arborist who's a certified tree risk assessor come out, and he did one recently. Actually, he had to look at 2 recently, and he sent us this graphic in one of the reports to kind of just show a little bit more about, recommended protection zones. And so I think this was pretty good. It shows, that the roots extend out 2 to 3 times the drip line. Really, from what I understand, a majority of the more structural roots are all within that drip line. So there are a bunch of jurisdictions around here that do just protect to the drip line. I think going 5 feet beyond the drip line, as our code already does, is smart because trees grow. So they're not just growing above ground, they're growing below ground too. So clearly leaving some room for them to grow, even if it's only 5 feet, is probably a good thing to be doing. So I just wanted to include this.
And I will add in that the arborist who we used, Damien Carrier, I think that's his name, Damien.
Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce his last name.
Carrier, or I don't know, it's French
Carrer
last name.
Or something,
Yeah.
Carré.
So he basically recommended also in those 2 cases that Emily brought up that our current code of what we're requiring is not gonna work.
Right.
He basically said these retention trees that you guys are saving in Zion Meadows is the ones he looked at. He said they're gonna fail because you guys are allowing the houses and the footings and the digouts to go way too close to the houses.
Okay.
So he did tell us that straight up, like, it needs to be beyond this, and we told him, well, the subdivision approval has it at 10 feet, so that's all we can require, and he said, well, we're probably not gonna be successful trees, yeah. So anyways, just wanted to add that.
Yeah, so actually what he was recommending here is a distance of 1.5 feet per inch DBH. This is something I think we would maybe explore in more depth later on. At this point, I think going with what our code says would be the easiest. But this would be, so say you had like I guess in this example, they have a 20-inch DBH tree. And so the protective fencing would actually be 1.5 times out, so 30 feet out on that. For ours, I guess it would be, 20, or it would be 5 feet beyond the drip line, so whatever
When
that
it
is.
says times the drip line, that's kind of an incomplete sentence. Because what the drip line is a physical item, it's not a distance. So it's 2 to 3 times some distance. So is he saying the distance from the base of the tree to the drip line, 2 to 3 times, or if it was 10, let's say the drip line's 10 feet from the trunk, roots, okay? Is he saying that the roots would extend out 2 to 3 times 10? The drip line is a physical thing. You can't take 2 to 3 times some computer monitor. You gotta take 2 to 3 times a number.
I think it's the distance from the trunk to the drip line times 2 to 3.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to define that, because that, I understand what he's trying to say, and particularly in the west of the Cascades, a lot of our trees don't have tap roots.
Right.
That's the point.
Yeah.
You know,
so
this
they're-
code
right,
in
they're
Bend,
going
Oregon
out.
would be stupid, because in Bend, Oregon, you have pine trees, and they have tap roots. In drier ecosystems, they do this, they don't do this, okay? So you can get away with all kinds of closer encroachment, and if you had ponderosa pine here, it wouldn't make a lot of sense either, because they have a tap root. You know, that's just the way they grow. But the point is, I want to comply with what this professor's trying to say. I just don't know what 2 to 3 times drip line means.
I want to bring up, maybe you're going to get into it, but it's how do we get to be, I guess, practical? We got the one over in Zion that trees are it's going to fail. You get somewhere between you have it down at the end of having the clusters, et cetera, because somebody comes in and then you have to go out this 50 feet around it, and then with our lot sizes, et cetera, I mean, I just don't see it being practical. Or it's going to take up so much of the person's land that they're trying to develop.
But could. It depends on.
Could.
I would
mean,
say
we're
that
also
that's
recommending
possible, and they
in
just
here
come to
that
us
they go
and
into
ask us about it
tracks.
for a variance.
What was that?
We're recommending that the retention trees would be in tracks or conservation easements, which is what we did for Marshall Ridge, if you remember. We have those 2 tree preservation tracks.
No. And
So
that-
it wouldn't be land, I guess it wouldn't be like where the house footprint would go, ideally.
So that's why I was trying to move it more towards as opposed to one tree in the anyway.
I mean, the other
Okay.
thing we can look at is just not giving as many tree variances either, I guess. Because a lot of times when they're requesting them, it's because they're trying to go to the upper end of the density standard. And if you have a really heavy forested site and you need to protect trees, the other way to look at it is you're probably going to be more of a medium density development because you have a lot of trees on the site and you're going to retain a lot of them. I mean,
that's why we
the-
tried to do the minimum lot sizes. And that was the whole intent of that code change.
Yeah, but a 7,500 square foot lot's not big enough for a house
Right.
and a tree.
We just saw that I mean, I drove by it today to see what it looked like after they've been taking the trees down. Can't remember the name of the subdivision
Oh,
or
yeah,
power
yeah.
lines, right? I mean, it's just,
Sandy Bluff.
Yeah.
yeah,
They quote logged that.
yeah,
that's
it's gone, it's gone.
Pictures from that one.
So I'm sorry, Emily, you had some pictures and stuff to show
Yes,
us.
Quite a bit.
so we actually
Yeah,
have
let's
a bunch
do
of
that.
pictures to go through. So again, I'm just gonna kind of walk you guys through some of the issues that we've been facing, like, as staff, kind of observing as we're out in the field, in these sort of active, subdivisions that are being constructed right now. Again, we're not trying to make this perfect, we're just trying to kind of make it better at this point. And I do think that we really need to bring this back, and then we can do more research into, what's the appropriate tree protection zone and all of that. But for now, just wanted to kind of go through some of the problems and some of the things that we've been seeing come across our desks. So this is a required retention tree in Zion Meadows on Lot 8 that we got a request for removal. Because this is one that we had our certified tree risk assessor come out and take a look at as well. We approved the building footprint within 10 feet because that's how our code was reading then. And still reads then. It also reads 5 feet beyond, but that's how it was written up for this Zion Meadows. So this is the base of that retention tree. That black you see is the required tree protection fencing. Clearly, it is not working.
That's the 5
They've-
feet from the trunk, right?
10 feet.
This is supposedly 10 feet from the trunk, but it's crushed. You can't even see it in places. It's been removed. So this tree protection fencing is supposed to be some of the first stuff that goes up, and it's supposed to be the last thing that comes down.
Right.
If that's just not happening. So they've, limbed this up. They've downed all of the branches onto the tree protection fencing. This tree has already been, probably compromised. The branches in this case look relatively small, but there's quite a few of them. They probably don't weigh like literally a ton, but they probably weigh a substantial amount. They're compacting the soil. The fencing is not protecting the tree, the trunk at all.
And this is one where the arborist said that the protection fencing should be at least 30 to 40 feet from the tree. And we said, well, the footing's going to be about 10 feet, so
Yeah.
good luck with that.
No. I mean, you can see from this picture, it's obviously it's a pretty big tree, it's pretty sizable. So that fencing, you can see it in this picture, kind of, you can see like at least
So does that
one
come
of the
back,
stakes, but.
jumping ahead, does that come back, this one here, to the enforcement or penalty phase that you have it outlined more in the back? I mean,
Yeah, we
We
did
have-
not penalize this one because they came to us with an actual, a request, an application. They submitted an application to remove it, and we processed it, and I believe they will be removing it. Because again, the house is gonna be 10 feet away, and when you do that, you're gonna be digging out structural roots, and it's gonna kind of compromise the
you know,
integrity
I
of the
guess,
tree, so.
I realize that, but I guess, let's say it was 30 feet out, that the fencing that was around and it was in that condition. I mean, it could
We
still
could
happen.
fine on it, yeah.
We
Yeah,
have
okay, that-
find, I'll show you a couple that we find.
Yeah, but I think Kelly, you hit it on the head. At the end of the day, what's more important, trees or lots? That's the $99 question, because if the toad grows to serve trees, then you set that up, you put up to 30 foot, and you say, sorry, you can't put a lot there.
And we
That
are
means a
writing
lot-
that as
That means you get
conditions.
fewer houses, that bottom line is, that's what it boils down to. And of course, that's where we'll get the blowback from the developers, because forever and all the days, they're trying to maximize the number of houses they can put on any lot. And if if they can set it up and they say, gotta drop that tree, oops, gotta drop that tree, oops, gotta drop that tree. It's everyone comes down one at a time. At the end of the day, it should never have been approved that way. Because if the trees are the most important thing, then
I think it's the balance. I mean, we're
Yeah.
only requiring, you know,
But at the end of the
they're
day,
taking
the-
down more trees than they're keeping, for
yeah.
sure.
But the issue is, at the end of the day, if the tree doesn't live, who cares? Okay? And what you have is situations to where you're impacting through the building so that the probability of the tree living is lower. Now, he says it's gonna die. I wouldn't, if I was doing him, if I was him, and I was an extra witness, I would never say that.
No,
I
we
would say
had two-
90%.
We had two different certified arborists say the same thing on this, that
Yeah.
never talked to each other
Yeah,
before.
because, you know, there are those situations where they're gonna it's gonna live. If you want to say a high probability, I understand all that, that's fine and dandy. But at the end of the day, what's, you know,
Mhm.
what's more important to the developer, it's the dollar, they don't care about the trees. But if this
Right.
ordinance is here to say, we're Tree City USA, we want the trees, then that tree has a value. And it may be $50,000 or $60,000, it may be $100,000 at the end of the day. And I'm not here to say that's right or that's wrong. But if you have code, then you need to enforce it. Or if you can't enforce it or don't choose to enforce it, there's no reason to have it. Let's not kid ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, as the director, though, I try not to be punitive either. If somebody was to repeatedly violate the ordinance and continually destruct fencing, or if it's more egregious, like one of the ones I just fined on last week, then I would fine, but that's not my go-to, is to fine. It's more just to get it into compliance, so I don't know. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know, but that's what I try to be, is not too punitive on people. I try to give them the benefit of the doubt until they prove me wrong, so.
Well, what I hear, though, you folks are saying in the big picture, you're recommending as we go into this further, that we dense pack the trees as opposed to trying to save individual trees all over the place.
Yeah, I think that's
And the
what we're saying.
objective is to try and ensure a higher rate of survival.
Mhm. And less
That's-
conflict between.
That's kind of the big picture decision.
Show us some more pictures.
Yeah, show
Okay.
us pictures.
So this is about 5 houses down from that one. This is Lot 2 in Zion Meadows. This is a retention tree. You can see the site has been graded. The fencing has been completely whatever.
Bulldozed over.
Yeah, bulldozed over with the soil grading it. This tree actually, I believe, was rated as fair condition back in 2015 when the original tree inventory was done. There actually were supposed to be 3 retention trees. We have no idea where the other 2 went. They're not there, so we're gonna have to mitigate for them. But this tree was not in good condition. Both arborists agreed that it'd be better to take it out, so it will be coming out soon if it hasn't already. But just another example here of a retention tree and kind of failed fencing that's just not doing its job. This is one we did fine on, so here are some trees. These were not retention trees, but they were recently planted trees on the adjacent property. We did ask that they put the fencing up 10 feet away. Had to go out there 3 times. This is the Next Adventure site. They had the fencing up and they just picked up the posts and moved it so that they could stockpile this soil there. So they got a fine.
They have corrected it since.
They have corrected it, or at least removed the soil. But again, when you're talking about compaction, damage is somewhat already done. This is City Townhomes right over here on Wolf and McCormick. We also had to go inspect this tree fencing multiple times. They went out, downed all the other trees. You can see multiple places here where the fence has just been plowed through. They actually downed one of the trees into the protected area, completely defeats the purpose. So another thing that Damien, our arborist, had recommended was using chain link fence. So that's in our code as well. This plastic snow fencing, I think it's called,
It's not, yeah.
is obviously not working.
We did fine on this one, too.
We find on that one as well. This is Birdsong, or formerly Birdsong, now Mountain View Ridge, over adjacent to Zion Meadows. This is being graded actively as we speak. We were just out there today. This is just to show you here this fencing's still intact, but you can see how close they get to it. You can see all the little roots kind of, and then you can see the tracks of the heavy equipment. So they're getting right up to it. This kind of excavation is actually really bad for trees. This is another example that's pretty typical that shows kind of storage of really heavy equipment right up against this fencing. So again, this fencing now is at 10 feet away. There are lots of structural roots happening here. I think you can see one in the middle here coming out by the whatever big scoopy thing on the right. That's a pretty big. What's the
big
big
scoopy
thing there?
That's awesome.
We'll look for that in the definitions.
We'll go with that definition.
This is that same one from another angle. You can see they've placed their porta potty right under, obviously, the canopy. So
Fertilize it.
they're yeah. I'm
What's
sure
all
that's
that?
what they're thinking. You
Air
can also see a
conditioning.
couple of
Put a hole in
roots
the bottom
by
and
it that
fertilize the
have
tree.
been broken here. And again, the kind of heavy equipment tracks. Another one where they've just kind of graded the site and sort of bulldozed, knocked over the fence. You can actually see a bunch of soil that got under the fence there in the kind of foreground on the right. So just, having a lot of issues with this type of fencing, with the location of it, with it not being respected, and just sort of being trashed. On the other end, so after you get sort of the retained trees, after the subdivision's been built out, we still get requests for tree removal, and often we actually don't even get requests, but this was one where the property owner did come in and request to remove the trees. There are 4 trees here. I don't have the best pictures, but you can kind of see how the individual homeowner is treating the trees. I don't believe this homeowner is the one who built the structure. That's kind of nailed in, and you can see all the sap dripping down. There's like a swing. I think it was a previous owner, but that's what they did to the retention trees. And then, of course, they're failing and branches fall and they hit the house, and so these trees are gone now. They
So-
were taken down.
And in this particular situation, there was, so it makes it really tough on us because 2 things. So 3 years in a row, and I believe the homeowner, he was actually a really good guy to work with.
Mhm.
3 years in a row, he said, my max out of pocket every year for my homeowner's insurance I'm having to pay. Because I said, that you can do it with your homeowner's insurance, but he said every year I'm having to pay it because the big limbs are coming and nailing my house, and every year they had to come out and fix my roof. And then the other thing in this circumstance, there's 2 adult children that are special needs. And so when the request came before me, I said, get the chainsaw out, because what are we going to do, deny that? And then these people with special needs are in the backyard, and how do you say no to that as the director? So yeah, that does factor into decisions, whether people want to admit it or not. So
Sure.
I think the problem is these trees are, like, as you can see, feet away from their house, and they were big, 120-foot trees, and if I lived in that house, I probably wouldn't want those 10 feet from my house either.
You don't sleep in windstorms.
Correct, exactly.
No.
Well, you gotta pay some serious money to take them down.
He
Yeah.
did.
They're coming down.
He did.
They're coming down with a crane and a
They
piece
are.
at a
Yep.
time.
He paid like
Right.
12
Yeah,
or
take
14.
them
He
down
paid like
pieces.
12 or 14 grand or something.
Well, they probably tried to make them 17 if they could, because 16, 8's, that's the way logs
Yeah.
are. So they always cut
Yeah,
a
he
16
craned
foot or
him from the front of
17.
his house and brought him up over his attached garage.
Yeah.
So this is one that Kelly got called out on. That's his car.
Yeah,
In
that's
the
my
middle there, he
that's my
showed up.
trailblazer.
These are a bunch of retention trees in both pictures, the before and after, if you will. This, I believe, was done illegally.
About 4 or 5 years ago, yeah.
Yeah.
I just have the pictures still. And I had to actually, was very hard to get the guy to stop. He was sawing into them, and he had 2 guys on the ground as well, and they were like, hey, you need to come down. The guy just kept going, and turned into a very good confrontation with the gentleman at the time. We fined him at the time, and I did get him to eventually stop, but he just kept sawing as I was telling his workers that.
I mean, you find the owner or you find the worker?
I find the guy that was removing the trees, but
He's supposed to be, he is a professional. He's supposed to.
he was
make
an
sure that
ISA
that's
certified
permitted.
arborist that didn't check in with us to see if they were retention trees. Yes, exactly.
I mean, that's just standard procedure for a
Correct.
professional.
Right.
Is there any sort of sanction to be done against people that don't follow?
There's like
that?
$1,000 fine per tree, which is basically a slap on the wrist.
Yeah, that's
Um,
okay.
It's,
It doesn't deter anybody because if you want the trees removed, you can remove them, and
Pay
we're
the
gonna only
fine.
be able to give you a $1,000 fine per tree,
Yeah.
and it's kind of done.
So, how can we fix that?
I don't know. That'd be a good question for our police chief and for David Doofman probably.
well, I think the other one too is to go back on this.
Make it
All this stuff is,
50,000.
all this stuff is kind of like punitive, how to get back on it.
It is.
But so in terms of the code, how do we get, I mean, trying to turn it around to what's the carrot we can do is for the developers? You know, I was kind of laughing as we went through on the urban growth boundaries, expanded it for the different things. That should have been one, more heavy timber, less chance of having that be open for annexation purposes. I don't know how fair that is, but again, I don't have the answer, but I mean, instead of going through the fines all, what can we do again to make it more of the carrot for the developer to do something and be realistic in terms of how many trees? I'm really have questions on when we lower it from 11 inches through here to 6 inches, you know, or we be even making it harder on ourselves, so keep going.
Just another example of some required retention trees.
In actually the FSH really close to Tickle Creek this was. This is actually on Rick or Wright Court. So right where I'm standing here that I'm taking the picture, Tickle Creek's probably about 40 feet behind me.
So that violates multiple sections of our code. So the intent was just to sort of show here that we have issues, you know, primarily on the front end with the tree protection fencing not doing its job. There's also issues then with homeowners in the future removing trees. You know, in theory, they should know if they have a retention tree on their property because we do record tree protection covenants. But I think probably there are some who honestly don't. They just miss that part or something. And so, again, in here we sort of have some language about putting them in the tree preservation tracts, which is what we tried to do for that Marshall Ridge subdivision that came through here recently.
But at the end of the day, everyone I've seen, to me, is, regardless of what the code is, somebody has to be the cop and enforce the code.
Yeah.
Because if you put the fence 5 feet outside the drip line, what's going to keep them from violating that, you know, parting heavy equipment there, you follow me? You know, so, I mean, I'm okay with putting it out further to survival tree. At the end of the day, all those pictures you showed up front are just enforcement problems.
Well,
Right.
regardless
If
what the
you've been
code
going out
is.
more.
but one big difference, so like this one, let's just take this one for example. The big reason why he felt he could remove the trees is because they were on his property.
Sure.
And I think if we take those and put them on tracks that are not owned by an individual person,
Right.
I think the chance of them removing those trees goes down exponentially.
Yeah,
Oh,
they're not
no, I'd
next to
agree.
their house or
I think
anything.
so, yeah.
So that's.
I mean, when I visit this guy, I'll just give you a tiny bit of backstory, not going too long. He was a very nice guy, actually. But he was from Alaska, and he said, I don't even know what land use planning is. That doesn't exist up there. And he said, up there you can just take trees down when you want. And I said, you're in a different state now, guy. But, you know, he was actually pretty compliant. He actually paid some pretty hefty fines at the time to plant trees. What we did is instead of, it was Tracy and I at the time, and instead of actually putting new trees on this guy's site, we came up with a better idea, and that was to put a bunch of new trees in the watershed. So he basically said, you know what, we're not going to put any trees on your property because you're probably just going to slow them down again. We didn't tell him that, but we said instead, why don't you pay, I think it was like $4,000 or $5,000 in trees, and let's plant those trees along Tickle Creek in that corridor. So I think that was a good, and plant some different bushes and shrubs as well. So I mean, that could be a potential option of looking if, you know, it's punitive, but instead of, it's like when our sewer treatment plant dumps chlorine spills or other things into Tickle Creek, we have two options of either paying a fine to DEQ or doing a replanting effort. So it's kind of giving them that same option of, instead of, hey, this $5,000 is going into the coffers and you don't really know where it goes, this $5,000 is actually going to be put into preserving and enhancing the creek sheds around Sandy, so.
And we're going to come back and have a little, hopefully, discussion about the idea of the tree preservation tracts. That's one of the things I'd like to talk about. But before we do that, I wanted to go through, again, some more issues that we're having with mitigation trees. And this is, again, more just to sort of let you know what we're seeing out there. I don't expect us to solve this today. I think it's a much bigger issue. But we do have some suggestions that might help. Here are a couple mitigation trees that were planted last year, or maybe even earlier this year in Zion Meadows. And these are obviously in somebody's backyard. There's actually 3 in the backyard of this one house. And I took a picture, zoomed out a little bit more so you could see better the sprinkler system that is sprinkling away from the trees so that they have very lovely green grass and 3 dead mitigation trees because the homeowners are not watering them. This guy came in actually and said he was watering them and they were still dying. That might be true. Clearly the sprinklers aren't watering them, so I guess maybe he's going out and watering the trees, possibly, I don't know. There are 3 to this adjacent property and they are alive still, so either that homeowner's watering them or that soil was less compacted when they were planted, or some other factor.
I think you have to do an autopsy and just pull them up and see if they were planted
Yeah, so
incorrectly.
we're gonna be going out later on now that summer is over, to kind of see which mitigation trees have
You
survived.
find
and
burlap around the
which
base,
died.
you figured out what happened.
But these will have to be replaced, so the homeowner's gonna have to replace them because they're required mitigation trees. It becomes their burden, for better or for worse, and it's recorded in the tree protection covenant for Zion Meadows. This is the other end of Zion Meadows, overlooking into a backyard. One of the trees, I do believe actually at one point both of these were dead, so they may have replaced one already, but here's, as you can see, one alive and one dead. The yard just to the west.
The yard's not being watered, by the way.
Hmm?
The yard's not being watered.
No.
Yeah. None
I
of
would
these are being
suggest the one on
watered,
the
I
right's
think.
probably
Here's a big
planted
dog.
bad.
So.
I see a
We
land,
want one
I see a
of the
landmine there
There
too.
is.
Yeah.
Thomas took this picture. I brought Thomas. He's like over 6 feet tall. I couldn't see.
Yeah, I
Rebecca
mean, the one on the
and I
left
actually
Yeah,
was
we
peered through the
fine.
fence at one point.
So why would the one on the right die? It's probably just planted incorrectly.
The trees.
Or
A lot
Well,
of
I'm
them.
saying
already
that
been
these are
replaced.
planted at the same time. One on the left survived, one of them didn't.
I think one of them
I
was
think one of
replaced
them was
because I think they were
replaced.
dead
Dead.
at one point. So I think they replaced one, and so hopefully they'll replace the other. Because we sent out a letter to a bunch of people down here saying, please water your trees. And then we said we were coming back out at the end of summer. I believe it's specified that we're going back out this week to do a check on all of this. So I think they replaced one of them.
Did they just, do you know when they planted those?
March probably.
Yeah, because you see the one on the left, you notice that it probably grew 2 inches, 2 to 3, you can see the growth, annual growth before, which looks like a good 1.5 feet before it's planted, and now which is probably normal, it's shocked, it's been planted. The question is, what's it gonna do next year, so, the one on the left might take off.
Yeah, it's possible. This is the other end of that same block, so there's 4 houses currently on that block. Same situation there, you can see further in, there's one that's live, one that's already dead. Those 2, what I believe are Japanese maples, are actually required mitigation trees. They were Doug firs. I actually finaled these houses, I never finaled them, in fact, I never approved either of them. I don't think you did either, so somehow they got certificate of occupancy, but we didn't actually ever planning final them because these trees were never planted correctly to begin with. But one property owner here has removed their 2 required Doug firs and replaced them with Japanese maples, which it looks like they are actually irrigating. So bonus for the irrigation, they're gonna get a letter, because they have to be Doug firs. Japanese maples aren't gonna count as mitigation trees for us. So that's another issue. We get a homeowner who comes in. We had another one actually who also removed their Doug firs. We had some correspondence. They eventually replanted them, but
But
it took a while.
do they have to be Doug firs, or can they be hemlock?
For Zion Meadows, they're specified as Doug fir. Typically, we would allow, western red cedar, western hemlock, Doug fir.
Had to be
pretty much
native.
Any native.
So-
Usually evergreen, but if it happens to be an area with lots of alders or big leaf maples, then they could be either of those probably.
When they're purchasing these houses, do they get something, I mean, other than the stuff that's buried in all their paperwork, do they get like a brochure, or do they have something that says to them,
No.
points out to them their responsibility?
No brochure, they get a copy of the tree protection covenant, but I'm told I've never bought a house, and so I don't know the extent of paperwork, and everybody at work keeps telling me apparently you get a ton of paperwork.
Yeah,
So
nobody looks at
it's
it.
embedded within that. I mean,
Yeah.
in theory, I would hope they would read through, but
Yeah.
I guess in reality, people don't actually read it, so.
It's in their title chain, so it's
Yeah.
in the paperwork you get from the bank, but
But you're
So
right.
maybe the city, I know it's an expense, but maybe there's a way that we could put together even just a small.
problem is though,
brochure or
once the
something.
house sells though,
To somebody else, you mean?
Mhm.
Yeah.
so
Like track-
you need to water these trees for 3 years for their survival. That's what the arborist even told us. So if that house sells in 6 months or even in 2 years, we don't get a notification that it's been sold, and so we wouldn't know to notify the new owners. But they would still, in their title chain, it would still be in there. That document's still in there. I mean, we could look at doing something like that. I don't think it's a bad idea. But I mean, I think it would work for some people, so I think it's a good idea, but.
Just to make, it would make it a lot less adversarial if we could educate new homeowners out here that trees are important and this is what their responsibility is.
I even wonder about, and this is beyond, as you say, it's kind of beyond the scope of the city, but educating realtors. I mean, how many times have we heard I mean, I can just hear it right
Yeah.
now, we can all hear it, I bought that house and my realtor never told me.
I don't want to bash realtors, but
We're
as I've
getting a
told
lot of
many
that.
people, their duty is to sell the house at the highest commission they can. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I'll give you one thought, we'll put my forked head on for a second. Trees like this are in the backyard. I would think we'd be perfectly fine for them to basically plant seedlings or something that's a foot or two tall. Because one, it's gonna survive, because it doesn't have a very big root system, it's easy to plant. Okay, you probably don't even have to water it, you may. But the point is they're not a street tree. So a street tree, we want stuff of certain height. We want something to, you follow me, look like that, but in the middle of somebody's backyard, this was a seedling. I mean, I got natural trees growing in my front yard I've never watered. They come, seeds come down and grow, I mean, that's what we do west of the Cascades. So I think we should consider the option of things like this that are not street trees. If they want to plant something that's smaller and just let it grow, your survival's gonna go up just because you're planting something that's that big.
I think even a little different than that is going through and playing cops, looking over fences, nobody wants to do that. And in terms of what you think is nice, if you like Doug firs, you want them in the back, it's their backyard and they're relatively small, I just say, let's move more towards the tracks and getting them out to have things so you don't have to go in the backyards. And have designated areas that have a really good chance of surviving or keeping on with their lives. But the stuff in planting the mitigation trees in the backyards like that, I mean.
Yeah, and this is exactly kind of to show you
Yeah.
that. It will get a little more complex in a second with a couple pictures I wanted to show. But yeah, it does seem to be, in some cases, the trees are being cared for, in others they're not. I'll go to this next slide. So here's one just from a couple weeks ago. There's actually 5 Doug firs back here. There's one, you see the mouse? I guess it doesn't show. There's one kind of right on the corner of the lot, and then there's 4 kind of more to the right-hand side there that you can see behind that grass. So this one was approved when the whole subdivision was approved. The developer proposed their mitigation plan, and they put 5 mitigation Doug firs in this backyard, which is a little excessive. I hope they survive. I kind of doubt they will, just based on everything else in this subdivision. But best of luck to them. So I think that's just another issue, again, of having them on private lots. So we do have language in here about the mitigation trees going into these tree protection tracks. The other benefit of that is that they would be fenced off and the soil would not be compacted, so that's eliminating one kind of struggle that they would be put into right away. That being said, here is a picture from about a year ago of what we were calling our dead Christmas tree field. This is Zion Meadows, their stormwater tract. And as you can see, about half of the trees, these are all mitigation trees, about half of them were dead. So we do, from Public Works, collect a bond that is supposed to cover all sorts of things for a couple years. And so we actually asked them to replace the dead trees, went out and flagged almost all of them, because even some of these ones that are green in here, you can actually see there's a lot of brown on the bottom. They're sort of starting to die. So I believe a lot of them were replaced. This is not a super great picture, but you can kind of see some of the trees in here that are brown and pretty much dead. They're sort of throughout. There's some along Bornstead Road there in the back that you can see. So this picture is just taken about a week and a half ago. So they've already replaced one set of mitigation trees, and now this second set is dying. Again, this was taken 2 years ago along Bornstead. This was taken a week and a half ago after they had all been replaced, and they've now died. Here's a tree right at the top of that staircase that connects to Bornstead from Zion Meadows. This is a different tree that was planted and has also died. So One thing that's not in the code that I actually just talked about to Mike, who's our Public Works Director this morning, and Kelly, you weren't there, but we were saying that maybe, so in addition, it seems like it might be better to have them in these tracks if we allow mitigation trees to begin with. But if we do it, that we probably would want to require irrigation for at least the first 3 years, and not just like, we're gonna come hand water them, like actually set up irrigation so that they have a better shot. That being said, any variance to tree retention is gonna come before you guys, and my guess is that as staff, we are gonna start not recommending approving many of these requests to reduce the number of retention trees, because
Well,
it doesn't seem to be working.
Well, like I say, I don't want to beat a point, but the reason these are all dying is they're all being planted, they're big trees, and, yeah, they have to be watered. You know, if you reforest land, you want 40 acres, and you put a crew out there and you plant bare root seedlings, and they basically, they get paid based on the retention a year later. I mean, they get paid a certain amount, but I mean, the point is 80, 85, 90% is really common.
Right.
You know, so they plant them well. And if we can just go out and plant forest land with trees and they survive with no other retention, then we ought to be able to do that. And the problem here is, if you just want a tree, it's okay, plant a small tree and let it go, because you're planting a small tree, it's probably gonna survive, you don't have to water it. It's
Yeah.
in Western Oregon, frick, it rains. Now, bigger trees are problematic, bigger root systems, they gotta be planted right, you know, and then they do require more water. I mean, they require more because they have a bigger ecosystem, so you have to take care of them. So at the end of the day, you know, if you want a tree, it should be fine to plant a small one. If you want something that's aesthetic, so, you know, immediately you want a bigger tree, then you gotta put the time and effort in to plant it right, water it, and take care of it. And I think we have the same standard for both of those. That's why I said, on those people's backyard, just plant seedlings, it'd be fine. You got a retention
Yeah,
tree.
I think in
takes
the
a while to get
backyards,
big,
the
who
seedling
cares?
might just get mowed down, but I agree for these retention tracks, if we go that route and do allow mitigation in
Well,
place
that's
of
fine,
retention.
we can do that. I think you've convinced us we have a problem. I'm ready to move on to the solution in the code.
Mhm. I mean, that would be an interesting thing, because another point that I talked about that's not gonna be reflected in here, because again, we're not trying to make this perfect right now, we're just trying to make it better. But one thing that we have discussed is whether the 2-to-1 ratio is the correct ratio, and I think if we were to go that route with smaller seedlings, we might wanna go more like, because again, the mitigation trees are meant to mitigate for these, 48-inch plus Doug firs coming down. So if you plant, 2 little seedlings, that doesn't really mitigate in terms of,
Well, it doesn't
ecological
mitigate them, it
benefits.
just doesn't mitigate them in your mental lifetime.
Yeah, so I think maybe if we did more like a 4-to-1 ratio with smaller trees, something like that.
Yeah, I mean,
it
the
might
point
get
is,
at
it's
it a
not
little
gonna look
better.
like it was before, but if your goal is to replace a little tree, I mean, we don't
Right.
require people to have babies that are 6 years old. Else in this big, no, we accept the fact the babies start small and grow.
Yeah, I think the problem with doing that method though is you're really thinking through. I think you're really letting the developers way off the hook.
Mhm.
So you're basically saying, propose these variances, and if we allow the trees to be removed, you're gonna have to plant a few seedlings.
No,
We're gonna have to
But
plant a
it is your
retention tree,
choice
your
to allow
definition,
that.
why does a tree gotta be 6 feet to be a retention tree? Or to be a,
Well, then
to be a mitigation tree?
I would look at more of just collecting money and putting it into a bank so that we can then determine how we wanna plant and
Well,
water
that's
trees.
fine, but the
And we
point
do
is that you can plant trees and they live. And if that's the goal of mitigation tree. And I think that's the issue. The goal is, if you want to mitigate one that's dead, you put in a little one and it grows. If you want to put in a visual effect, in other words, like a street tree, to say we want them this big, like, we had very specific requirements when we required the trees to go around the reservoir, down here in Scenic Meadows, because we wanted those trees to almost immediately start to shield that from the neighbors. I mean, we had an objective, and then, and you'll probably know, most of those survived. I mean, they watered them, they took care of them, they planted them well.
But that's the key, though. I think if they water them, and that's what we're saying is 90% of the time, no matter what the size of the tree that you plant, is it survives.
Okay, but that's an enforcement issue. I mean,
No, it's just collecting enough money that then we can hire out a crew to go out and water them. And
Well,
so it's
water
not
them,
on the
put in a watering
homeowners
system,
anymore.
require them to put a watering system in that'll work, you know?
No, what I'm
whatever.
saying is we would say, you have to put all these mitigation trees on this tract, and we're gonna collect enough money from you, developer, that then we're gonna have a crew go out and take care of all the watering for the next 3 years.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. So
Yeah.
I think if you set it up that way, no matter what the size of the tree is, I think it's gonna survive 90% of the time. That's been our experience at least. So I think what's flawed is that we're relying on homeowners that either don't know how to do it enough or don't have interest in preserving the trees,
Or
and therefore
deliberately
they
cut
don't
it
water
down
them.
without even asking you or telling you.
What's that?
Or they deliberately cut it down without asking you or telling you.
Right,
Right.
that too. So,
Or we have an HOA that doesn't really exist, that
I mean, that's,
watering them.
this is a little bit outside of this conversation, but we're actually looking at, and a lot of cities are already doing this, is all street trees would be planted by the city
Mhm.
and watered by a contract through the city. Because what we end up happening is probably a third or half of the street trees out there all die. That's what we're saying. It's probably about a third to half die off. And that's because some homeowners really love the trees and water them, and some homeowners don't care about the trees and don't water them. I mean, that's the only difference.
And a lot of them have been planted improperly, we're finding.
Yeah, but even the ones that are planted improperly,
Yeah.
though, if they get enough water, most of
They
them
still-
are
yeah.
still, maybe they're not surviving as or growing as good as they could, but they're still living. And so I think that's the issue: is who's taking over the maintenance responsibilities? Is it the city or is it Joe homeowner?
Yeah.
Which we have about a 50-50 if they're going to care to maintain the trees or not.
Well, and then you get back into the one too of, do I really want a Doug fir? Okay, somebody wanted that Japanese maple in the back. I mean, they've got a limited backyard and they bought this land that they think is theirs, but it's really not, and it's not spelled out to them. I'm not sure how to solve that one. I go back again to going back to the tracks more, moving it somewhere else. The size of the tree, I agree with Don totally. It helps the smaller ones. I live out, I've planted hundreds and I know probably 1,000, thinking that, well, maybe I'll have a 25% survival rate. Cause you just take a shovel and stick it in there and step on it. You know, probably 85–90% survival. I mean, the lower it is, it doesn't have to compete for
Or forget
all
it.
that much. But anyway,
Yep, let's go on to
Yeah,
some more.
let's have so the purpose of today is for you to give us information and then as I understood it, and then maybe we'll have a work session to kind of drill down.
Yeah, but we have
There is-
suggested some changes in
Okay.
here, more,
Yeah, if you
Some
assume that
immediate
this section's
changes.
not gonna go to city council, that's yes.
Okay,
Mhm.
go.
Yeah, so this is the last slide, really, a couple discussion points, so again, we're trying to kind of better protect these retention mitigation trees. We as staff have been leaning towards, putting them in conservation easements and or tree preservation tracts. We're looking for, kind of your input on whether we require all of them to be in a tree preservation tract, and a conservation easement. We want to say, 75% need to be in a tract, but we could have 25% scattered throughout the development, just away from, the building footprint. Do we want all of them in a conservation easement, but 75% in a preservation tract? Like, do we want to split it, So there's a couple of kind of options there. Also, the size of properties that this chapter applies to. So right now it's written as all properties more than 1 acre. We were thinking maybe more along the lines of 10,000 square feet, which is greater than a typical single family lot, but about a quarter of an acre, a little less. If we do set a size, then I think we do need to also make it clear that it also applies to properties with retention or mitigation trees on them. We do get quite a few calls. I got one today actually of somebody saying, do I need a permit or do I not? I've heard both things, and we have to say, well, it really depends. What subdivision are you in? We have to figure out if it's a retention tree or not, and the size and all of that. So I think just making a little bit more clear that this applies to retention and mitigation trees. So any input kind of on the size, that would make sense. And then also we would kind of want to add something in about having to inventory trees on adjacent properties, but just, a little bit that might be affected. I think we've been leaning towards the trees whose drip lines are within 25 feet of the property that's being developed, so that we can, know where those trees are and have the fencing up. And we will be inspecting that on Marshall Ridge. That's already something we asked for and have asked for in a couple others, but just making it a little bit, again, more clear in the this is what we need submitted. Kind of fine tuning maybe what that distance is, what makes the most sense. So those are 3 points, and then anything else you want to talk about, we can talk about, but.
Yes, I was just gonna add on one more thing. So I think the goal is, if we decide to send it, so I guess the thing you gotta think about is, with what we're proposing and what, you know, you guys could make some additional modifications, would it be better to adopt something like that than to leave it as currently written?
Right.
Which I think it is.
Yeah.
Because right now, as Emily already pointed out in great detail, that it doesn't, it's not consistent with 1792, and it's not working whatsoever. So I think not adopting anything or not forwarding on anything to City Council, we're just left with a worse product than we otherwise would be. But I don't know.
So what if could we suggest that we send it on with the condition that we have a tree, like, work session, like, before the end of the year? Is that reasonable?
No, they gotta either,
Yeah.
I mean, they're depending on, we do the staff work for city council. That's the bottom line.
What?
We do the staff work for city council.
Okay.
That's our
They-
job.
That's
they
our
don't.
job.
All right, it doesn't go to city council until they're ready to go up or
Oh,
down.
Okay.
Right, so
So we need
the
to
question
get
for
sooner
us
than later.
is, if we feel we have, I think we need to go through this. And then when we go through this, do we feel comfortable with whatever we say going on to the council? If we don't, then we develop a plan to get it that way,
Okay.
so we can bring it on. And if that's a work session, and then at the next meeting, whatever we want to do to move it on, that's fine. But it doesn't, I won't vote for it to go to council half-baked.
I don't think
we're
it's
not doing
half.
our
I don't
job.
think it's half baked though.
No, I don't think so either. And I think we're beginning, I think we're confusing issues here. And the staff has presented the stopgap measure to fix things that are obvious and fixable without a whole lot of work. But at the same time, it's exposing a bigger issue, which is where we're just talking now. We're talking the bigger issue, and we're not looking at the stopgap that they're presenting to us, that, at least as I'm seeing. So, I'm in favor of getting the stopgap measure onto City Council and letting, and it's obvious that we're concerned with the bigger issue, as is staff. I mean, you're not happy with the stopgap. You don't feel that your job would be done on this particular
Right.
ordinance by what's going on to City Council. So I don't think it's gonna get lost. I don't think it's gonna slip
Yeah.
through the cracks.
Right.
So, I think that we're getting caught up in the weeds, and the stopgap is just what's being presented.
Well, I think we need to go through it and decide it's a stopgap. At this point, all they've done is taken about an hour of our time to show us a bunch of slides to say we have a problem that we all knew we had. Until we start going through this and discussing what they've given us, I don't know.
I think
if it's
that's
stopgap
what we're
or
asking
good
you
or
to do,
bad or
Ron.
whatever. So
Okay,
let's
yeah.
say, let's start going through this.
Looking at just what they've given us.
Yeah, I don't know if it's good, bad, or indifferent, but what I am concerned about is we're gonna get the next development application that comes in front of us, will have to comply with the code that's in place at that time.
Right. a
And
10-foot
there's
is
no
not
reason
working.
for this to be not something that we don't think we can live with for a few years. So I'm concerned about the word stopgap.
Well,
Bottom
Okay,
line
so you're wanting
is,
to
then you're
solve
gonna
the
go
problem.
change it again, and now some other developer's got some other. The bottom line is, we need to go through this, and we need to see if they've hit the bullet. If they have, great. If not, we need to take the time for them to hit the bullet, because the developers are the ones that are gonna have to start complying with it in coming in front of us.
I understand that.
Coming with the next
So what you're
subdivision.
saying is you want to solve the whole big problem at one time.
I don't know. I don't know what the big problem is versus the stopgap. Well, I don't know what is the big problem versus what they've got here.
Well, I think the problem that she started out with tonight was that picture. Can you put that picture back up at the tree root system? At the very beginning? And so that's our current thing right now, is that that
this.
Yeah, I mean, so it's okay,
So
so
10
we got
feet
something here,
doesn't
change the drip line. Fine, if we change the drip line, we've addressed that. But as far as a bunch of fencing being knocked down and equipment being parked next to fencing, that's just an enforcement issue. It doesn't make any difference on what's in
Well,
here.
yeah, I don't
Well,
think
we've
anybody
put
argues
chain link
that.
fence as one recommendation, that's based on our arborist's recommendation. So
Yeah, but if
rather
they,
than the
they'll just
snow
park
fencing.
equipment that close, no, this little further away. The point is if they're cutting closer to the drip line, however you define it and all the rest, is a code enforcement issue.
Well, it's,
I
I have to enforce it.
But
Well,
It's not
the
a
point
code
is, a lot of
enforcement
you
issue.
showed us, I've seen their problems, but I'm trying to distinguish between the ones that are implementation issues, code enforcement issues and all the rest, versus something you want to solve with what we have in front of us today.
I mean, we'd like it to not get to code enforcement, we'd like the fencing to stay up and be a little bit more protective.
Yeah, I mean, if
So
somebody is
that's-
violating the code, we get more
Yeah.
code cops to go out there and work
The
on
the
it.
cops don't get involved with this though.
I said code cops.
Yeah, well, we don't have,
Yeah,
we have one
we
code
only
cop
have
and he
one
doesn't
guy.
deal with tree issues. so.
I think if
Right,
we.
well, maybe he does, but the point is, you showed me a bunch of problems, and changing the rules isn't gonna change those problems. They're just gonna occur a little further from the tree or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but,
Yeah.
Somebody's gonna dump, they don't wanna respect the fence you put up by either putting dirt on it or parking stuff by it. It doesn't make a difference if it's 10 feet from the tree or 25 feet from the tree. They're still
Right.
gonna violate that point. That's why I'm saying that's
I mean,
code enforcement. I'm
how-
okay moving the fencing.
what I was hoping for tonight is that that's one of the reasons Emily sent all of this code language to you in early September,
Mm-hmm.
was that if you had any big issues with what we were proposing, that you would have reviewed this.
We did.
We did.
I've gotten,
Okay,
I could
well,
read all over.
let me finish. And that we would know kind of tonight what are the big issues with what Emily is proposing.
We will, if we start to go through it,
Well-
page by page like we did the others.
Let's do it.
I didn't know you wanted just, if we had something to send you emails and.
No,
all
not
that,
send
you gave
emails,
it to us
but be ready
review.
to discuss the issues tonight.
Yeah.
We are.
But not have to go through line by line, that you've already got your things
What-
up.
Yeah, I
I've been
mean,
through
we've
this
just
be-
been looking at
Hang on,
pictures,
hang on,
guys. We
hang
haven't
on.
hit the point.
We've gone through this before. I don't feel good about the time that I think it's gonna take to go through it. I think it's a couple hours to go through this effectively. I would rather try to set up a workshop that's on a different day. I'd be more than happy to try to work with everybody's schedule to do it, because I think it's that important. I think that going through it tonight and trying to go through it is gonna shortchange it. I have questions when I read through it of it, is, it's not just fencing, I see a lot of things cross out there, 11 inches down to 6 inches. I see 20 trees, now it's up to 50 trees. So I'm not sure, are we making it more harder on ourselves? And again, going back to what I said earlier, is how do we really make it more of a carrot where we're trying to figure out how to get ahead of it? We're coming in here with these relatively small lots in Sandy. I don't think that's gonna change in the near future. So what do we do to entice developers to do the tracks, et cetera? Because you show us picture after picture where it doesn't work. The backyard mitigation trees. I don't know exactly what the answer is, but I see that the inventory is gonna go from 11 inches down to 6. I mean, I'm just going through it. That was one of my first questions, is what are we now pulling in more retention trees? Does the definition actually expand now because of the size of diameter that we're looking at?
So the retention that we're recommending is just taken straight from the BVO, the Bornstead Village Overlay Retention. So it does up it from 3 trees per acre to 6, but it allows some to be 8 inches DBH or greater rather than all of them having to be 11 inches DBH or greater.
I guess my confusion, so writing code now for 13 years, is that I think a lot of people see code revisions as you gotta get stuff perfect. We could go through this for, I'm just gonna be kind of ridiculous when I say this,
No.
but 40 hours. And I guarantee you, somebody will find a workaround within the first subdivision or two to what we just changed. And so how I look at code language is you go through it, you modify it to the best of your capabilities, and then you apply it and see how it works. And then you bring it back again and you modify stuff again, and then, so to me, code revision should be happening every couple of years. When you look at a code standard, and this was looked at 3 years ago, we didn't adopt anything then, and you think you're gonna perfect it, You're being, no, I'm not saying you're doing this,
Yeah.
I'm just saying that if a person's doing that, they're being very naive because there's always a workaround to the code sections.
But-
So I think it's kind of an evolving thing where, I'm not saying we have to adopt or forward a recommendation tonight, but what I'm saying is that whenever you decide to forward a recommendation, realize that this will be back before you in another 2 to 3 years with,
That's
hey, this
fine.
doesn't work
That's
now,
fine.
this doesn't work.
That's fine.
I'm saying, just going back to reiterate, I think it's important enough to spend more time on it than trying to go through it. I mean, it may be a little more structured meeting where we try to really stay point by point. I don't know.
Well, that's what we've
But-
just done with the other four. We went through.
Well, the other four were a little different,
They're a
than
lot
a lot
smaller.
different.
Yeah.
Well, we haven't
you
made,
know-
we haven't even made a try at doing that here. Like I said, staff has been showing us pictures for an hour.
Well, that's what I was
Convinces
saying.
we
is-
have a problem, we
Okay.
already know we have. So we've taken an hour, we could have been working on this.
All right,
So we
well
wanna
then
spend another
let's
hour
stop
so we can
talking
do
about
that.
the other things and let's go to what they proposed and go through it.
That's,
Let's get her done.
but I can take 5 minutes for a break first, because we're at 2 hours.
Oh, yeah.
I would like to ask.
I mean,
them
what
if
are
we're
the
gonna break-
revisions?
What time are we gonna put into this? Because I mean, I just know the questions I have are, I don't know. I don't really, sorry, I don't feel like being here till midnight.
No,
I'd
this-
give it a
no.
shot until, get till 10, and if at 10 we think we haven't got somewhere, then
Yeah, and I think we need to remember Kelly's comment, we're not, the goal is not perfection. The goal is better.
I've seen a lot of people try to write perfected code and it's a silly exercise. It doesn't work.
So-
Yeah.
It does not work.
We have two more commissioners sitting up here, so where are you guys in terms of, are you leaning more towards going with the recommendation for now and then having a more detailed work session to do a broader scope? Or are you wanting to go through it tonight? What are you thinking?
Well, this is my first time as a planning commissioner to go through code revisions, so sort of as the first four, I guess, were a preview. Definitely, there's a lot more content in here and a lot more questions and more revisions and examples of what other people do, and it seems like a lot more to talk about there. I guess, big picture though, I'm okay with making changes now to make it better. Kind of with the request that we have future work sessions or more work to develop those code sections to improve them beyond, but I get the need to clean it up and make some minor improvements soon. But I agree with Ron, I think it warrants enough time to go through this and piece by piece and make sure we do a thorough job with it like we did the other four. I don't, honestly, I'll defer to the more experienced commissioners to know how much time that takes, but
Well, let's
I'm
do
happy to
this.
do it.
Let's, oh, go ahead. You were-
Well, I don't have much to add to that, but this is an important thing. It's about the future of visibility
Mhm.
of our community. It's not like, it's not a minor thing, so.
No, it's not.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong to
Yeah.
interpret that I'm saying it's not important. I think
No,
it's
not.
important to move ahead.
Yeah.
But again, to have, we're gonna look at these as staff has presented, and you're gonna have to keep in the back of your mind that this is not perfection. And you're going to have to struggle with yourselves, saying, I want more, I want more, I want more, and that's the 40 hours a week. Okay, let's look at what they presented and give them the feedback that they've asked for. So, can you just kind of begin walking us through what you
after a
have?
5-minute break.
Yeah, after 5
Because my attention span's going to go nowhere.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm right behind you. So let's.
The movie must have been done.
Okay, kind of walk us down through here. I don't know that we need to get caught up in the sidebar discussions.
Okay.
You know, unless somebody has raised a good point that's not in the proposed revisions that one of us here wants to highlight.
Okay. So 17-102-00 intent A, I will actually go into the comments column for this one, because currently it does say greater than 1 acre. This is pretty big. As I mentioned before, I do think we at least need to clarify that it applies to any property that has a retention or mitigation tree on it. We were thinking maybe greater than 10,000 square feet. That's something we kind of wanted your input on moving forward. That would be roughly a 1/4 acre. So something to discuss. Just B here is just to really say that the intent of this code is to facilitate preservation and retention and mitigation trees. That's sort of.
Okay, so, I mean, so we're looking at you've struck out 1 acre, you haven't struck anything in, you have it in a comment. So,
Yeah, that was
do
my
we, I
question.
would just look around, and do we want to insert 10,000 from the acre? Or do you want a different number? You ought to put
What's
something
the-
in
yeah.
there.
What's the purpose of 10,000? Just kind of big enough to have trees on it?
Yes.
Like one lot in Sandy Bluff comes to mind, it's not 10,000, but it does have a great big tree on it that really is like close to the house and it's in the way, but there's a brand new house on that lot.
Well, our SFR, which is our biggest lot size is I believe 7,500, right?
Right.
Right, so all it really says is gonna apply to anybody who wants to do any work in SFR or below. I mean,
To
so
create lots.
that's really it,
Right?
you know, but like our lot, it happens to be over here, it happens to be 10,000 square feet. So, you know, if there was an isolated situation, somebody had a little piece of ground that was 10,000 square feet, like these 2 lots were broke off and my lot was 10,000, it would have applied to. But in general, from a subdivision standpoint, as long as the number is bigger than 7,500, it doesn't make any difference. There's no reason to high center on it. So 10,000 is just as good a number.
And this is, when we're talking about properties here, we're talking lot size?
It would be contiguous ownership, so if you own 2.
The development,
Mhm.
I mean, any development's gonna be bigger than 10,000 acres.
Oh, yeah.
This would be for existing single-family
Yeah.
homes, too.
Mhm.
Yeah, but it takes
So
into
if you own
account
2
an
properties
individual
next
lot
to
that
each
might
other.
get popped up.
So it
Okay.
should be to the lot size, I think, if you're gonna lower it. I mean, because it's to existing lots, right, or existing homeowners?
It'd be for both, yeah.
Yeah.
Development and existing lots. I mean, I don't know, it's just a question we're posing before you guys.
Well, keep in mind the last sentence. This is in the urban growth boundary. So you're talking about, this applies to some place that's clear out by the red schoolhouse. The urban growth boundary goes clear out to there, comes around, so.
That was one of my
You got
questions.
No, that's the urban reserve that goes out there.
the reserve.
Yeah, the urban growth boundary is the one that we just updated, it doesn't go.
Yeah,
all the way out there.
okay.
You're talking about the one by the Christmas tree farm out there?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's the urban reserve there.
We had comments about switching it to city limits, and our lawyer, David, said keep it at urban growth boundary for various reasons that I don't quite understand. But
Well, we
that's what
talked
he
about it
said.
when we had the discussions on the urban growth boundary. One of the big discussion items was what keeps somebody from going out, cutting all the trees on their lot, then coming in here and saying, oh, we want to annex it.
Well, our
Now it's
annexation
clear
code
cut, so
we
now you don't have any
We changed
retention
that.
trees because you cut them all before you brought them back in the city.
That code through already, so.
Yeah, so that's the reason for the
gist.
urban growth boundary is to,
This is basically, do we want, I initially had just crossed out greater than 1 acre and was having it apply to all properties. Kelly is the one who put in 10,000 square feet presumably, so that it wouldn't apply to every property. That would probably, I guess, end up being a nightmare on our end, just in terms of processing. We'd have to process every single tree removal request on every single property, which would be a lot of work.
Yeah.
A
And
lot of
I'd-
cities do that.
I mean, I'm ready to defer to any of these numbers that staff can justify or they prefer. I'm willing to go with because they're no better than any others, but you put more thought into it at this point than we have. So if you feel 10,000 is the right
10,000.
number, I suggest we put 10,000 down and move on.
Okay.
I vote for 10,000 means it's close to the rest and just take out it and say properties within the urban growth boundary.
Say that again?
I vote for not having if we have 1 acre now,
Uh-huh.
I vote, my input is to just have properties within the urban growth boundary.
So you don't have any site.
No site. Again, somebody's on a 5,000 with a big old tree. What makes that any special? Just because they follow boot. And again, it goes back to your number, Don. There's 4 zeros there on it. But
What's the downside,
makes sense
Kelly,
to
of,
me.
what's the downside of
Whatever
not
lot
having a
size you
size
have,
there?
yeah,
You comply with the ordinance.
yeah, you comply with it.
How's that, how does that affect your, my lot is less than 10,000 feet, so if I have a big tree on it, which I don't, and I wanted to cut it down,
Then
how
you
would
have to
it,
come
how would
with
this
it.
matter, right?
You'd
in
get
that
a permit.
context?
Yeah. If we
And-
didn't set a size limit, you would have to come get a permit.
And you'd have to get an arborist to evaluate the tree.
But as it reads
Only if it's a
now,
required retention though, right? Or a hazard?
No, because we'd basically be saying that you have to retain a tree on your lot.
That's what I'm saying.
So what I'm saying,
Oh,
look for,
no,
Ron made a
that's
proposal,
so
which is
much, right,
okay.
so
What I want to
so
hear
you
from
take
Kelly
every
is why he
rule
wants
listed.
10,000 because it's against him. I just
I don't
want to know
think
the
10,000
reasons
is
on
any
both
bad.
sides.
So I guess the big question here is if we do adopt the 6 per acre, say we were to adopt that. Right now it's
Okay.
3, so it'd be kind of more confusing. But if we were to adopt the 6 and you had a 7,000 or 6,000 square foot lot, in my estimation, you had to retain a tree.
I don't think so. I think they would just have to apply for a type 1 permit.
Yeah, but you'd still have to retain 6 trees per net acre, right?
This is why I don't think we can do this.
For tree retention.
So how would we just magically waive that tree retention requirement? See, when you have an acre, it's real easy because it's 3 trees or 6 trees or whatever you want per acre.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Which, it would still be that per the counting, but if you have what's 42,560 divided by 6? So if you have that size of lot, in my opinion, you had to retain a tree.
Mhm.
It's about 8,000.
Yeah.
Or pay
yeah.
into a mitigation.
Just figure the ratio.
Or pay into a mitigation bank, or, so I think it's that, plus then you're paying for the person to evaluate your tree. You're paying $100 for the tree permit. And then what we have to deal with is a lot of angry people that currently do not have to do any of that.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, hundreds of dollars.
Adding a level of bureaucracy, we may not.
So your reason for 10,000 is to avoid those issues.
My reason for that is because most lots in city are below
Less than-
10,000.
So that's how you.
So
write
this
it
is,
down.
this kicks it up more into the area of developments.
Mhm.
Or if you have like a quarter acre or half acre lot, to me, I think you should be retaining some trees on that. If you have a half acre in the city limits, I think you should be retaining some trees. That's just my feeling on it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I understand the rationale, is that if it's 10,000 or less, I mean, who cares? Clear cut it, put a house on it like mine, okay? But if it's above 10,000, then we like to see some trees retained.
That's
And
my.
you're saying that 1 acre or 3 acres is too high, that you could have, it's currently 3 now?
So here's a prime example. If you have currently less than 1 acre of contiguous ownership, and you were to divide that into a subdivision, and you put 4 or 5 lots, you currently don't have to retain any trees.
Because
And
the
you just
lots
put
are
in a
less than-
subdivision. Yeah, you just put in a subdivision. So if you have less than an acre and by our density standards, you can put in, let's just say 4 lots or 5 lots. You just built a subdivision without any tree retention requirements. So the other way to look at this is to say less than a certain size or, division of property. So no matter what the size of the property is, if it's a half acre, whatever the property is, if you're subdividing it or partitioning it, then you have to do tree retention. That'd be another way of looking at
Okay,
it.
why don't we do, the other one is, if you want a number, then go for half an acre, go from, the 1 acre we have it now.
It's 3 acres now.
No,
They've
it's
1 acre.
recommended 1.
Oh, why?
Then crossed it out.
Oh,
So 3
okay.
went to 1, and now he's at 10,000.
Oh. That's a big-
Where's the 3?
No,
So-
it's
It's
1.
always been 1
It's 1.
acre.
It was 1 acre, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's 1.
But the way I'm understanding it now, and it's becoming clear to me, that's like a bottom floor. In other words, below that, you don't have to retain any trees at all.
Right.
Below 1 acre?
Okay, so it's like
Correct.
1 acre, so like
Right.
what Cindy said, right? And so if you want to keep trees, you're gonna have to lower that to some level, and he's saying
Right.
10,000, because then if you have more than 10,000 square feet in your property, you're gonna have to retain trees.
Correct.
Right?
Right.
And so if you had a 3 acre lot, or a 1 acre lot in the city, you'd have to retain some trees.
Correct.
Which is the size of a football field. You know, and you would think if you had a lot size of a football field, you could retain some trees. But, the only lots that are over 10,000 square feet in the Saturday city limits probably are in our neighborhood.
There's some other ones actually out there, but yeah, there's not a lot, you're correct.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing new being built with
No, no.
23,000 square foot lots. like
Nothing.
we have on our side.
I
Yeah.
bought one last year, and I think mine is around 13 or 14.
Behind your freshman term?
Mm-hmm. And eventually puts like a fourplex on it, and so there's a big old tree, and if I had to keep it,
You don't have, well, you would though, because it's contiguous property.
How big is it?
Or you'd have to apply to remove it.
yeah.
Yeah, you wouldn't necessarily have to keep it, but yeah, you'd have to apply for a tree permit. But if you own that property and it wasn't contiguous to the rest of your property, then yeah, you wouldn't have to retain it. Just
So
saw it
what
down.
I hear you saying is that, Ron is saying why even have a number in there at all? All you're saying is that means that everybody has to go through the hoops and all the bureaucracy of everything like that, all right? And so having a reasonable number to protect that.
I understand
And that's where he came up with 10,000, so.
Mhm.
And
And it was-
considering the lot sizes in the city, it seems like a reasonable number.
Yeah.
Both in terms of our code, and I'm sure, yeah, from some legacy, you can find some legacy bigger lot, around. I'm just talking about newer subdivisions, you're not gonna find anything that's got 22,000 square foot lots in it.
No.
I understand it again, but after having it, I'm proposing half an acre, so it's down, but it's still bigger than 10. That's what, that 22,000?
It's a number that doesn't have 4 zeros in it.
I know.
There you go.
Yeah, what is the square footage on half
Well,
an acre?
43,560 divided by 2.
Yeah.
So it's 21.
21 something.
something, yeah.
No, do the arithmetic.
I don't know, 21 something.
I mean, 10,000 is just a little less than a quarter acre, I think.
Uh-huh. I'm ambivalent on that one, whether it be half an acre or,
I kind of am too. I was just throwing a number out there.
It doesn't sound like it'll make a big difference.
I don't think it will.
No, I don't think so.
I think if we say all lots, I think as we've already
That's-
pointed out,
Yeah.
it's going to be a
That's a
nightmare.
big difference.
Yeah,
But I do
huge
think we
difference.
need to specify though, because I don't want people getting confused, oh, my lot's only 7,500 because they're in a new subdivision. Well, they have a retention tree on it, so I think we do need to at least make that clear, that it's 10,000 or bigger, if that's what we go with, as well as any lot that has a retention or mitigation
Well,
tree.
if you want half an acre, that's 23,780. You just want to write it down.
Yeah, half an acre would be fine too. I mean,
okay, why don't we go with half an acre?
Yeah.
it's an incremental step
I don't
in
And-
the right direction.
and
I know it's got one
Better
zero.
than no stuff.
One
And the
zero.
additional wording that you suggested?
The
Wasn't
additional
it-
wording is,
Emily,
or,
yeah.
yeah, or any, whatever I wrote in here, I guess, any properties, less than half an acre now that contain a required retention and or mitigation trees.
Yeah.
Would you would you reference it as half acre or 20,150 something feet?
We could do both, we could do one in parentheses.
Yeah, I mean,
Perfect.
Doesn't matter.
it's not arguable as to how many
Yeah.
square feet is in it, so.
Okay, the next thing you got changed is the bottom of page 68. You changed a 7 to an 8. Sounds like you changed 70 to 80, is that right?
That's a pretty easy one. Emily can explain probably in a couple
Yeah, that was,
sentences.
last July of 2017. The state, changed they actually introduced a new type of creek that was a
So this is
salmon
just, that applies
steelhead.
particularly to Tickle Creek is all right?
Yep, and
So-
Tickle Creek is that new type that is now an 80-foot setback instead of 70.
If it has salmon steelhead, it's 80 feet, right?
Yep.
Which Tickle Creek does. So.
Yep.
Yeah, and the reason for it is to be consistent with other code?
Or state.
The state.
Oh, state,
Requirement.
fine, I mean 70 to 80, let's
Yeah.
move on to the next one, which, that's Ron's thing, is finding a tree to be 6 versus 11.
Our code already defines a tree as 6, so the comment over here is, can we just delete it and use our definition? And I believe David responded saying, yeah, unless there's a reason that a tree would be defined differently in this code, but there's not, so.
So
Yeah.
where's it, you saying the code defines a tree as 6 now?
Yes, currently, yeah, the definition section of the code defines
Oh,
a tree as 6.
in the definition section of the code.
Chapter 1710.
So we
Okay.
can just rely on that definition and get rid of this
Yeah.
one.
Good.
Yeah,
We can
because
define
it
significant
implies, when you
trees.
say for the purposes of this chapter, it implies that you've got to unique definition.
Correct.
Right, which this did for some reason before, but I don't know why.
So we
Again,
don't,
David said his suggestion in talking to him is anywhere where we can delete
There you go,
Well,
different
as much as
definitions
possible,
in
we ought to
different
be able
sections of
to
the
refer
code
to
and write
one set,
positive.
one set of definitions
Okay.
for glossary.
So tree removal, this just,
Oh, wait a
better
minute.
defines normal trimming and pruning by talking about the American National Standards Institute pruning standards and the best manual practices. This is just from the International Society of Arboriculture.
Just for, take a second here, you got a conflict. I'm reading in the definition section. It defines a tree having a trunk of 6 inches in diameter, maximum cross-section at a point 24 inches above the mean ground level. 24 inches, not DBH.
Okay, so we can,
I think chapter, I don't know.
I'm
We'd
on
have-
page 17.10, page 31.
We'd have to look at it closer.
so I guess for now, we could leave this in at 6 inches DBH or greater until we update our definitions, because we're not planning to update definitions until all the
Well, we
other
could,
code
I mean, you gotta
sections
update the
are-
definition in here, I mean, update the definition, because I think that DBH is, well, we use DBH for everything, going to 24 inches would be a,
Yeah,
right,
it
but
doesn't
what
make
you're
sense.
saying is for this right, you'd go back to for the purposes of this.
Yeah, we can
section.
leave that language in here, because we're not touching definitions right now. Just-
Yeah.
We'll be coming to that. when
So
we
you'll
finish
have to
everything else.
word it that for the purposes of this chapter means the 6 inches, DBH.
DBH, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, are you gonna say, for the purpose of this section, a tree is defined as such?
Yeah,
Yeah.
You might, just to eliminate confusion, you might put a word in front of it on a mitigation tree or a site tree or something.
Yeah, it already says in a FSH section that a tree is 6 inches DBH or greater, I believe.
It's where you, the conflict's where you measure it, you know. 6 inches is 6 inches, but DBH and 2 feet are a big difference in. where you
yeah,
might
well,
be
what they're
measuring.
doing here is they're kind of overriding the definition section with their own definition of where it's measured.
Yeah.
So that kind of begets the purpose though, is having 2 different definitions, 2 different
Well,
places.
eventually, when perfection comes around, they
Which
would,
never happens.
they would change the code to read DBH, and then that line could be removed.
They would change the definitions to that? Why don't we
But
do that
they
now?
don't want to now.
You can't legally right now, unless
you-
we gotta
Really?
go back through DLCD and tell them we're changing that code section.
Well, then I guess you have to be careful then, to be sure you underline or make sure it's clear that for the purposes of this section.
Yeah, we'll
Right.
just leave it in as.
We just leave it in as
Okay.
you
Now,
got
that's
it
the kind
there.
of stuff though that developers people will point out to make your code confusing.
My question on this next one, I don't know, these particular books or sections that you're referencing, are they gonna be around for a long time?
ANSI,
No,
ANSI?
not the ANSI, the 300 pruning standards and the companion best management practices. Is that
My guess is that they are, I believe they're just publications from the International Society of Arboriculture, so they probably update those specifically.
okay, gotta just make sure they aren't, they don't
Yeah.
go out of print 3
You
weeks
might,
in.
just wordsmithing, because I keep putting my forestry hat on, it's hard to do, because we are in urban forestry, and I got a master's in that subject, so you have the word, use the word trunk, and most people think trunk is the base of a tree. Generally, a tree is the main stem of the tree, the stuff you take to the mill, top to bottom, that's the stem of the tree. So if you're referring to removing the crown, the stem, or the root system, would be more precise.
yeah, we can change that. Trunk to
Because the
stem.
trunk, people are gonna think of the trunk as the base of the tree.
Yeah, the bottom section.
Okay, so noted.
Okay, so under applicability, we just removed that 1 acre, so we could put the same thing there.
Half acre.
Yep,
The 6 inches would stay.
the 6 inches. We added the landscaping and screening section of the code to number A2 there. Clarified B1 a little bit more, just to make it clear that it's public roads, it's not like private things, public utilities, public structures, public infrastructure. B3 there is just exempting public parks from having to go through the process if it's specifically for maintenance or improved safety. And that would be jointly determined by Kelly and Mike, essentially. So right now, if they want to remove a tree on park property, they have to come through us internally. So this would just sort of eliminate that.
It's a lot of extra work for nothing, really. Because we get an arborist involved anyways, and then it's like all this paper pushing basically to get to the same result. It's kind of a silly exercise.
So type 1 permit would be, instead of removal of 50 or fewer trees, it'd be 20 or fewer trees.
So that, and I know, Ron, you had a question around this one. So that's not changing any retention standards or anything in that regard. It's just saying that if you remove more than 20 trees, it kicks it to a planning commission decision. Right now, you have to remove over 50 trees for you guys to review it.
It just kicks it to a type 2 permit, is it?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. So it kicks it to a notification.
Yeah.
So if you're removing right now 50 trees, we don't have to send out notice to the neighbors, which is a lot of trees to allow removal of without notice to the neighbors, so.
Do you want us to have city limits there or urban growth boundary? Since you said this thing applies to the urban growth boundary, I just was
On to.
asking if you want to
I don't know.
make this only in the city limits versus the urban growth.
It's a good question. Doofman looked at this, and he was the one that said keep it, so he looked at all this, but we can ask him that, should this.
Well, I would ask him, why are you doing this in the city limits? I mean, if I'm in the urban growth boundary, then
Are you talking about where it says, under type 2, where it says within city limits?
on page 69, according to your page number. Type 1 permit, number 1, tree, it's where your 50 and 20 gets changed, and in the, prior to that, you have city limits under contiguous ownership. And I'm saying urban growth boundary is what you said this whole thing applies to. So you want to exempt people that are in the urban growth boundary and outside the city?
No, in what circumstance would you be beholden to this if you're in the UGB but outside the city? So I think that's why my question about the UGB, you wouldn't ever worry about this code if you're outside the city but in the UGB.
And there's coding in there, if you're within the UGB, that if you cut X number of trees down prior to when you annex it, then you're held off from that. But I don't see how you could force anybody that's outside the city limits to, not cut down their trees if they wanted to. I'm not in the city.
You actually can through the Oregon Forestry Act, which is in the last part of this chapter. This Oregon Forest Practices Act, if the city ever decides to take that over from the state of Oregon, which we can legally, then we could do that. And I think that's why David's saying keep it in here, in case in the future we decide to take over tree removal from the state of Oregon.
Well, you take over enforcement.
And permitting.
Well, yeah, because they're going to come from Malala, which they
Right.
might not come. And
Right,
so you'd
exactly.
have to have the manpower to do it.
So I think that's the reason why he's saying to keep it in there, so that if we decide at some point to take it over from the state of Oregon, that we still have it written in our code that we can look at inside the UGB.
So I'm clear then on the 17-102-30, under A1 then, tree removal on sites within the city limits, or are we saying within the UGB, or we're leaving it city?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I think we need to talk
We'll
to
ask
David
David.
Doofman on
Oh,
it.
okay.
Because
Yeah,
he
'cause
looked
it-
at all this and he didn't change those. There's
Yeah.
another one on the next page too. So I think we just need to circle those and say, David, should this be modified?
Yeah, because, 17-102 says the intent is for this to apply
Correct.
to the urban growth boundary.
Right.
So unless there's some specific reason to restrict that to the city.
Okay, we're up to B.
Yeah, so under B1, B, we've added in, so essentially before we were just asking for the location, species of trees that were 11 inches DBH and greater to be retained. Really, in reality, when we get these tree inventories, there's often other trees that can be saved, so we typically already get an inventory of all the trees on the site anyway. So this is just clarifying that. So we're asking for the location, species, size, and condition of all the trees. on the property, and this is the part about the, also on adjacent properties, because we need to know if there are any trees right on the property line or right really close. They are gonna have tree protection zones that encroach on that property that's presumably developing. So, I think actually right here it's written as within 25 feet of the subject property. I think after discussing, we thought it would be all trees that have drip lines that are within 25 feet, so the trunk or stem or whatever you want to call it itself might be further away. But if the drip line is that close, you would want to kind of just see those trees as well. So that's what that is getting at. And then we would want them, of course, to mark which ones they're proposing to be retained, so that, and then which ones they're proposing to be removed, so that we could respond to that.
So the trees are within 25 feet of the boundary, right?
The
Well, we're
drip
saying
line.
if they have a drip line that's within 25 feet. But if you thought that it would be better to just include trees within 25 feet.
The way I read your B is that you have to include all of this stuff on any tree that's within 25 feet of the boundary, and I would interpret that to be the base of the tree is within 25 feet of the boundary, and drip line's got nothing to do with it.
It's under the comments, is one of the
Yeah,
discussions we
that's-
were having.
So the
Well, I'm just
code,
reading what you have here that you want us to approve or not.
no.
No.
So B is written one way, and that's why I said we intentionally left the comments on here, because
So we could
we
see
wanted to
other
have a
options.
dialogue and a discussion with you on, do you
Yeah.
like how we're proposing it on B on the page, or would you rather it be modified
Yeah, give
to
us
follow the
some
drip line?
options.
Well, the drip lines within 25 feet would take you, it might take you 100 feet from the property boundary.
And I know we did this. on
Potentially.
Marshall.
Potentially, and
Yeah,
which
could-
then, how do you get permission from the adjacent landowner to go on their land and take all this tree inventory? What happens if the landowner says, you can't come on my land?
Yeah, that's where I was going with that, because I know we did that on Marshall Ridge, and it worked, but, yeah, aren't you sort of,
You can guess from, I mean, there have been cases where an arborist can't get in, I think on Marshall Ridge too, because it was fenced off and there was like a cow or something, so, they just
Okay.
guessed from far away, yeah.
Well, my point is, when we're requiring a developer to take an inventory on trees that are not on their land, that is a property issue that needs to be somehow dealt with within here, because as you said, there will be a property, and there will be some landowner who says, by God, you aren't coming on my property and measure those trees.
Right, so then they just take their best guess from the property they have access to.
Yeah,
and
because
they have to estimate sometimes anyway, because they can't, there's black
Okay,
areas
well,
or
I'm just,
something.
part of our review is a little bit of devil's
Yeah.
advocate a little bit, so.
Yes.
Steep Hills definitely restricts inventorying, sometimes we've been told.
but couldn't there be an
Well-
instance where the tree protection zone is on the adjacent property too? Or
Yeah.
They wouldn't
would
have to
start
fence
there.
it if that wasn't developing, they would just have to fence where, because they're not gonna be developing on that other property, so we just need to determine if there needs to be fencing on that property. So we did ask for that, we're already asking for that, so in Marshall Ridge, we can see from Google Earth, well, there's a lot of trees down there, so when we go out before we find out that one, we're gonna measure, are they protecting the trees, because,
no? Okay.
So if
Right.
yeah.
I'm just thinking about how this might apply. If the base of the tree was within 25 feet, then the drip line is definitely going to be closer than 25 feet. So then, if we get to the part of the code which will say protection, the drip line of that tree could actually be on the subject property.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay? And so they would have to put in fencing to protect the neighbor's tree.
Right.
Is my
Yeah.
point.
Right.
Well, it should be.
Okay.
Right.
All right, now, if you're doing it within 25 feet of the drip line, that moves the trees further onto the neighbor's property
Correct.
potentially.
Yeah.
Because if the drip line's 25 feet, the trunk's gonna be further than 25 feet, all right? So it depends how far you wanna go. I'm okay with the base of the tree being 25 feet. Because at the end, that tree, it may or may not receive protection, and it simply depends on where the drip line to that tree is. And they'll just have to.
So you're in favor of how B is written?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, that should be sufficient.
We were just throwing the other idea out there. We weren't, the one that we have on the page is the stronger, is the one we were suggesting first, then we just wanted to have this dialogue.
yeah. And when we have those two, all I look for you guys for is what's the pros, what's the cons, so we're at the same knowledge level you are, and then we'll just make a decision. Otherwise,
I would
I'll just
agree
go
if-
with what you have down here.
If you're going 25 feet from the drip line, it's gonna be harder, because you are getting farther away from the property
Yeah,
line.
I think we ought to try this one first.
Okay.
Good.
Yep.
And then just adding under E there, any mitigation trees if they're being proposed, we want to see the location of those as well. And that's typical, we already get that.
I think the rest is pretty self-explanatory down to B, type 2. And all that's doing
Five
is.
Yeah, so you got the same change, you've got the same city limits to check on.
Yeah.
Yeah, the 300 feet instead of the 200 feet.
The revisions have been made.
So here you're changing the notice area to be consistent with what we did back in the
Correct.
other ordinance, basically,
Yeah.
right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Next page.
I guess we could just refer it to a typical type 2 notice or something, and not, because we changed it again, but. So at the top of 17102-4 that page,
Yeah, so the next one, you're just being consistent again, you're changing 300 to 500. on the
yeah.
Type 3.
Okay. Just going. So, under 1710240, we've added that the cost of any third-party review to determine compliance with this chapter would be assessed to the developer. This is similar to what we do with our traffic letters. So we don't have an arborist on staff, like we don't have a traffic consultant on staff. So when somebody submits a traffic letter, we send it out to our traffic engineer and we charge them the review fee, and that would be the same thing here. So when we bring out our certified tree risk assessor to get a second opinion in cases, it would be assessed to the developer.
Is there any particular reason, educate me here, on your type 1, your type 2, you start off with changing the 50 of the 20 and saying it applies in the city limits. But on the type 3, neither one of those are there, are they not needed?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, the type 2 does say within city limits on A, so I think that needs to be looked at by David too. Should that be UGB again?
Well, yeah, the sentence starts off the same. It says type 2 procedure, type 3 procedure, and then the very first one is it applies to, contiguous ownership, et cetera, in the city limits, and this one is aggressive variance, so.
My guess is that city limits is not needed anywhere in here because it says in the applicability section it's within the UGB, so.
Yeah, it was just consistency.
I think we could strike all the city
Yeah,
limits
take out the
references.
city and just.
That's my guess, but we'll check with David.
How come you got rid of planning, the planning director?
I checked that too. The definition, there's a definition for director.
Yeah.
It says the planning and
Okay.
the
So
longer
in the
title.
beginning of the code, it says wherever it says director within this code, that means my position. So we just it's kind of redundant
It's
essentially.
defined, and you
Correct.
actually
It's
are defined.
Correct. Just to take out a word and to confuse you.
Well,
Doesn't take
it's
much
probably
for
not
me.
right, because they probably figured it out when they built that new name tag for you. And it's longer than planning.
Uh,
So 1710240B, we've changed it from the permit being valid for 1 year to 2 years. We realized recently, I think it was with the Mountain View Ridge, formerly Birdsong subdivision, that we were coming up on 2 years. The subdivision approval was good for 2 years, but in theory, they couldn't have removed the trees after the 1 year, so. It
Yep.
was kind of more, if we approve it, we approve it, and whether it's 1 year or 2 years, it didn't seem like that big of a difference, it'd just be a little more in compliance. 1710250, so like I said, we've just sort of proposed for the time being to be consistent with what we already have in our code for the Bornstead Village overlay, because that already has received quite a bit of, review, that section of the code, and included public review and everything. So that one says 6 trees per acre within the BVO, and then actually 9 trees per acre if you're within 300 feet of the flood and slope hazard overlay. So we kept those numbers the same. It's just instead of saying six trees 11 inches DBH or greater, we wanted to allow a little bit more flexibility, as we have been lately. Since our code defines significant trees as 8 inches DBH or greater, we split it into, having 3 of the retention trees would be 11 inches DBH or greater, and 3 would be 8 inches DBH or greater, just to allow a little bit younger trees, which I also think have a better shot at survival as well than the older ones. And so then this point 2 there is just that if you're within 300 feet of the flood and slope hazard overlay, it would be up to 6 trees 11 inches DBH or greater, and then 3 trees 8 inches DBH or greater. So those are the same numbers as the current BVO standards.
So at what point in the planning process, when we go through with this cluster idea, is the conservation easement or prevention tract identified? At what part in the planning process? I think I know the answer. I'm hoping it's before they cut the trees.
Yes, it's during the tentative land use approval.
So we
Yeah,
did it
because
for
what-
Marshall Ridge.
Yeah, that's,
remember that.
that's the one Ron is discussing, I think I shared it, but I forgot about it. When we were sitting here, we said where the retention is gonna be, and the comment from them was, we can't tell you really, it's way too forested, to
Oh,
really,
yeah.
to do it. And I said, well, that makes sense. We looked at the map, yep.
Um,
My assumption was that before they cut any trees, they would have defined everything better so that, you knew where they would be.
They did.
They did? So the few scrags that are out there are there? Okay, so that's the process that I'm just want to make sure I understand that before the chainsaw goes off, the retention trees have got to be somehow defined.
Yeah, that one was an interesting one, but yeah, we did go out there on site a few times and check with them on which trees could be retained and which trees couldn't.
Are they going to be standard or what?
Well, most of the trees are going to be retained on the other side of the power line easement in the future. That's where most of the trees in that subdivision will be, along
More
the creek.
like this dense pack?
Correct, exactly. There's already a creek, like a seasonal creek there and everything, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember that.
Now, a conservation easement or prevention tract is recorded, it's on the deed. Who owns that tract?
I think typically it would be the HOA if it's a tree preservation tract.
I know you're not gonna wanna hear this, but we historically, when we did subdivisions, we had them deed certain areas to the city because we know HOAs famously don't work. Just like your dead trees, they get formed and then at the end of the day, there's no enforcement within an HOA, there's nothing you can do. So at the end of the day, is there a reason why you wouldn't take these tracts and deed them to the city? And then they would be maintained and taken care of, and there wouldn't be a question on who owns it.
I mean, we'd probably need maintenance money.
Yeah, that's totally a budgetary answer to that one.
And it is for the HOAs too.
Right.
And what ends up happening is if the HOA goes defunct and the land then reverts to the county, and then they auction it off eventually for like $1 and nobody buys it, so the city then ends up buying it in the future anyway.
Yeah, well, that's the way it may end up, but at the end of the day, we went through tons of subdivisions, I mean, maybe before you even got here, and I remember us discussing, well, first of all, if they build a park, they deed the park to the city, like in Timberline Estates and some of these others. If not, they give us money in lieu of, so we can go do it. At the end of the day, it's almost like your comment, and I agree with it, on the street trees. We want them to live. We also want them not to be cut down, like the end of my street. Okay? And nothing happens. Nothing happens. So, and I've reported it. So at the end of the day, that planter strip is city property, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I know where the
Usually,
property
yeah.
line goes, and that's the whole point, where it's city property, but they're required to maintain the sidewalk and that. But at the end of the day, the reason you're suggesting that we maybe even take over the maintenance of the street trees, is to make sure they live, work and all the rest. Well, if that logic continues over, I mean, you got these other dense pack areas, and if, an HOA or a homeowner, they're all the same. Generally, somebody's gonna take care of it and somebody's not, but HOAs generally, if they don't, there's no way to enforce them to do it.
Yeah, I talked to Mike about this morning too, because it is a real issue, as you brought up, and a lot of the HOAs do dissolve. And we were kind of just getting into it, but about the need for a recorded maintenance covenant that requires ongoing maintenance as well. And I don't know exactly how that works, but it's.
Well,
something that
to
we
me,
need
they're
to-
almost going, it's almost, if you build these, you almost don't need the maintenance. Because you've created a little forest, is my vision, and it's just gonna
Yeah.
be a natural ecosystem.
And the
kind
tree,
of all on
the
its
tree might
own.
naturally die, and that's fine, and it's a snag, and that's great for ecological reasons.
Well,
So it is to think about.
The expensive
being
part,
over.
the expensive part comes down to, though, a lot of times these preservation tracts will still have sidewalks around them and will around the right-of-way areas, we'll still have areas that need to be trimmed for tall grass and weeds. And as the city takes those over, then it becomes the city's financial responsibility to weed and mow those areas, and then also to replace sidewalks and do that kind of thing as stuff fails. So there is definitely a financial implication as you take on more tracks. I agree with you, and I think if we had the resources, which we might in the future, I think to take on the tracks is the best thing. But then it does come with more maintenance responsibilities.
But you got a lot of those tracks now,
Yeah.
from that subdivision decisions we made.
Yeah,
So I think it's really I think it's a larger question than will ever be answered at the planning commission level, because I think it's really gonna be policy driven from council
Well-
on where do you wanna put your general fund money to? Is it maintaining land, or is it for services, or what is it for?
Well, I mean, the way you would do it is you charge more system development charges or something on the
it's just
subdivision.
arbitrary.
You charge them maintenance.
Somebody
They gotta put in X amount of money that goes into a city fund to maintain those areas.
Yeah.
Okay, move us along.
Okay, I mean, so that was one we did want a little input on, of whether we wanted 100% of the trees to be in a conservation or tree preservation tract, 75%, should 100% be in a conservation easement, but then only 75 in a tract. I mean, there's a little bit of flexibility. Right now, we have it worded as they should be in, all of them should be in one or the other of those two things.
I would think, I'd worry about it, because it's gonna depend on the site. They mentioned
Yeah.
put 75 in, again, that's kinda like 100, it's a number. If they wanna put them all in one spot, that's fine. If they wanna spread a few out and put them all in one spot, that's fine. Because, I mean, we're here because we have all these pictures that we saw of these individual ones, either aren't gonna live, or the owner's gonna take them down, or the mitigation trees die. So, I mean, they're all in a dense pack,
Is it possible, I mean, does it make sense to try and do like a 75-25%? Or don't you need to make that determination based on the geography of the land and what they're trying to do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I could see
So-
it being kind of an individual. I was thinking about Marshall Ridge, the one we recently did, and they did put a majority of the retention in those two tracks, but there are a few that are in backyards, and those could just be in conservation easements. I don't believe we required it in that case specifically. They are under tree protection covenants, but I don't know that we added the conservation easement to those, but we could do
Yeah.
that.
The other way to look at
Just how
it
it's
is
worded.
you could just say they all have to be in easements or preservation tracts, and if they can't meet that, they'd bring it before you guys as a variance.
Mhm.
yeah,
Do that.
even if you put 75-25 in, they're either gonna meet it or come to us.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't make a difference if you
right
put
now it's either
75-25 or what you wanna do,
So-
unless you really think you wanna have a few in backyards.
Well, and even if they're in backyards, they can still have a conservation easement. So, I mean, as written, that's what it's saying, so it should be
Uh-huh.
okay, I think.
So we're saying 100%?
Yeah,
And then.
in an either or, yeah.
Yeah, it's up to them,
And then if they didn't want to meet that, they would just bring it before you as a variance to this.
Right. Right.
So if there's a special situation why it makes sense, then you guys would make that decision.
Mhm.
Okay.
It'd be kind of fun to take some of these developers and the people working for them and give them a site at 10 acre, 15 acre and say, okay, now with these basic requirements in mind, how would you lay out? How would you approach it? Okay, again, I'm trying to figure out how to entice them to do the right thing that we're after, right? And then the other one is when you get into, I have a wheat field, doesn't have one tree on it, all right? So do I have any tree problems, and how to get that one to look in, let's say, 5-10 years, kind of inviting as opposed to just this grid with these little boxes or,
Mhm.
And a lot of pretty street trees.
yeah, you know,
Yeah.
so.
Well, now, I guess that brings up a good point, and we haven't got to it yet. What if you do have an area that is completely void of trees, and they're gonna develop it? Do we have a section in here that requires them then to plant trees, or do they off the hook?
Pretty much off the hook is how we've always looked at it.
Well, that's,
So there
isn't-
like, at the last meeting, that's what I said. I mean, this area's all forested before we showed up. And the areas that are not forested are because they were whacked out for agriculture mainly,
Right.
and or in here. So, we're gonna get either one of those. And, I guess something we might want to think about is if an area doesn't meet the minimum tree retention standards because of natural past history, do we want to require them to maintain some minimum level of tree planting?
Yeah, beyond street trees.
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
It's nothing that's really been evaluated before.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I like Ron's suggestion. The only problem I have on the first one was, this area is so frickin' hilly that no matter what 15 acres you pick, it's gonna be so site-specific, because the topography is gonna control it.
But the other one too is.
If it was flat, it would be easy.
If we go through and make it so onerous, and I'm not saying we are, for the developer coming in, then they're just gonna start moving around and finding those vacant, open tracks. Cause I could just go to town on it, right,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
tear it up. So again, I'm not looking to cut all the trees down or whatever. I'm looking for what's a good happy medium so the developers can make some
Yeah.
money and make it look nice, especially, and I always, down by the dog park, what's the name of the?
I mean, Wood Village dog?
Sandy Bluff.
Sandy Bluff.
Okay.
You know, I mean, the nice.
How could you forget Sandy Bluff?
Because I tried to forget it. But you know, I'm coming back with something a little more inviting than that, where it's just.
Yes.
Okay?
I agree 100%.
So that's what I'm kind of searching for, of that, you know, something more interesting and
Mhm.
on it.
I don't want to take a shot at that development at all, but I will in the sense that it looks like it could be anywhere. Like it just looks like a track home development from anywhere.
Right.
It doesn't have, the park's nice, but it doesn't have a lot of character, the subdivision itself.
Well, and we'll probably have some of those, but anyway, well, I like the idea of maybe requiring them to meet some tree planting requirements if there's no trees on the site, and we don't need to do it tonight, but
I think that's a
That
good
could be a
idea,
homework
too.
list.
We can research, I can research for that.
I think we'd
These
have to do a
are
lot of
good.
I mean, I think if you sit down with a cup of coffee, by whip it out in about 10 minutes, you know, at your desk, you know, using what's here, but, because you'd lean on the minimum requirements here.
Mhm.
They just have to plant them,
Right.
and
Yeah.
you wouldn't have to worry about how big they are. Start small.
Okay, what's next?
So next is
We're-
just clarifying, so before, the top of the.
Page 5.
Page, yeah, 5. Before it just said trees, retention trees had to be healthy and likely to grow maturity. We just specified in good condition, because that's typically what we see in the arborist report. It'll say very good, good, fair, poor, dead, dying. So just to clarify that a little bit. And then specifying that they can't be nuisance species, so we do.
Where are you reading right now?
It's the top of, it says,
Top page
Top of
72?
Page 17, 102-5.
At the top?
seeing my
Yeah,
two
at the very,
page
very
numbers.
top.
But one quick comment on that, the last sentence that's inserted, it says retention trees may not be nuisance species.
Yes.
Is that defined? Nuisance species defined?
We can add that to the definitions.
I mean, non-native,
It's defined in,
that one could be a can of worms.
it's on Portland's plant list. They have a list of nuisance species, so that's what we refer to.
Like, yeah, well, they refer to which one it is, because anything you get in a nursery, who knows what that is?
There's nuisance, not species.
Well, the point is, it could be any, if we put 1,000 different trees. I got a lot of LA pines in my yard, come from Texas.
We're talking about the old.
Are they nuisance?
Old growth Carlton.
I don't have any. I built in 2003, man. I saved the 4 trees that were there. One was some non-native conifer, and the other 3 were
Nuisances.
hardwoods that I eventually cut because the neighbor.
Yeah, so
Okay.
we'll add that to the definition.
Yeah.
Okay.
8 is just basically requiring what we already do require.
Which is the tree protection covenant. And then also noting that the tree protection area is going to expand as the tree grows, which is pretty obvious, but just making sure that it's stated in there so it's clear to people. Under B, tree protection area, this is getting at what Don was kind of talking about in terms of enforcement, just making it clear that failure to install or maintain the tree protection measures is a violation of the code and may result in a fee, penalty, or citation, which it already is. It's in our citation section, but it's just making that
Puts them on
little
alert.
clearer.
Yep.
So again, with this tree protection area, what we've gone with is the 5 feet beyond drip line of the tree, but in no case less than 10 horizontal feet. So that sort of combines the 2 chapters and makes it a little bit clearer. Also acknowledging off-site trees that have a tree protection area, so the 5 feet beyond drip line that overlaps with the development property would also need the tree protection fencing on that property that's developing. So 3, the required fencing shall be a minimum, that our code already said 6 feet, 6 feet tall, supported with metal posts, placed no farther than 10 feet apart. Based on our certified arborist recommendation, I added in that chain link fence because it was clear that that snow fencing was not working.
So you want a
So I think-
regular metal chain link
Mhm.
fence?
Yeah, I mean, that's what other cities are using. It seems that it works better, and
What
I
developers will
defer to
squeal on
his
that cost?
recommendation on that. I did include his quote in here. This is quoted from
It's easier to
one of the
move 'em.
reviews, so that's
Yeah.
what he was recommending. And then also
Mhm.
to install a sign on it that actually says, this is a tree protection
Yeah.
zone,
Nice.
and this is what the penalty would be if you encroach on this or move it, so that that's clear
That's
up
up,
front, and
yeah.
it hopefully will help not make us have to do so many
People like the
enforcement
And
actions.
they need to put a they
It's
need to put a
metal.
wildlife camera on all 4 sides that's motion sensitive. This captures pictures of anybody.
I just want to make it an electric fence.
And any cougars, by the way, that just might drive by.
Before you move on, I'm just back at that same section we were just in, number 2, the off-site trees, and I'm just thinking back to what we talked about when Don was talking about the 25 feet. Where was that?
Well, the trunk is 25 feet. It has to be
This
inventory.
references the drip line. I'm just wondering if we need to be consistent on,
Well, this would be, so,
This is protection, the other one is inventory.
correct,
Correct.
exactly.
oh, okay,
So,
okay.
yeah, we wouldn't have to protect it if the
The other
drip
one's
line.
inventory, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
if it was off-site completely, it wouldn't have to be protected.
Gotcha, never mind.
Ron?
Can I go back to A, the
Yeah.
one right above it, to number 8? I'm just a little clear, so as the tree grows, the protection area will increase? Does that mean I need to move my house as the tree gets bigger, or? I'm not,
No.
What does it mean?
But,
Is a tree going to grow during the time the house is being built?
No, it wouldn't mean
no,
that.
no, I mean afterwards, you know what I mean?
yeah, it'd be
10
more in the
years later.
future.
Yeah, 10 years later, as I'm saying.
Yeah, like if you wanted to put a shed under there or something
Yeah.
like that.
I think that's confusing personally. I mean, if you, the protection zone is wherever it is, whenever you get to the tree. I mean, it's a nice statement, which is true, but I'm not sure.
So if it's in my backyard, then that means that my backyard will kind of shrink in terms of what I can use, right?
Only if it's more than
Well,
half an
then,
acre.
and then technically, if you did,
Right.
if it's
No.
like this, and you build a shed here that's legal, and then 15 years later, it
Mhm.
grows bigger, do you now have a non-conforming shed?
Right.
You potentially, yeah. I mean, we could strike it.
I just think it's gonna be extremely hard to enforce.
Yeah,
As
if you
it
can't
goes down the
enforce it,
road,
there's no
yeah.
reason to put it there.
Yeah, and it's a hard
And you want to
thing
get out of
for
people's
people
backyards
to
anyway, put
remember.
them in
Yeah.
fence packs.
Yeah, we can strike it.
I think you'd probably be better.
I mean, yeah, we can just strike it and revisit it maybe later on and see if there's any other codes out there that speak to it better.
Mhm.
Uh-huh. Okay, now we can drop down to the capital C city.
Yeah, I think we can
That's a
skip
really
those.
important change.
So,
Sounds like the word cop got on it.
under the variances, 17-102-70, I mean, right now, we're having our trees typically at 6 to 8 feet in height if evergreen, or 1.5 inch caliber if deciduous. I definitely get Dawn's point. I think that would be kind of maybe in a next iteration of looking more at seedlings and what a better mitigation ratio would be. As I mentioned before, all the variances would come through you as planning commission. And as I also mentioned, as staff, we're not really feeling like the mitigation trees are working that well, so I don't know that we'll be quite as supportive of variances. That will be your decision, but just kind of keeping that in mind, that we may not even get to this mitigation tree situation if they actually meet the retention requirements. We would never even get here, so.
Unless they were going into some sort of a conservancy or clustering, right? Would you be open to that?
For the
The,
mitigation trees? Potentially, I mean, I think it would be worth a discussion, but
Because couldn't you put all your mitigation trees into a conservancy area.
Yeah, so we'll get to that on number 5,
okay.
Under here. But like as I showed you with those other pictures, and then as we've been discussing about HOAs, they tend to not actually, maintain them. So that's the part where, like, do we require them to irrigate for the first 3 years?
Oh, yeah, if they're having to do that.
Probably.
I was
I
thinking
think that
city.
would.
One quick, the definition kind of thing on this one at the bottom of the page. It talks about doing this planting a native species during the active growing season, or then by June 1. So that begets the definition of active growing season. And if you look at just go to the next one, which is number 2. It says areas with exposed soils resulting from tree removal between October 1 and March 31 shall be covered with straw. It seems like you're defining the active growing season to be on the other side of October 1 to March 31. And if that's the case, why don't you just, instead of active growing season, just go from April 1 to September 30 instead of active growing season? Because those two go together. One says get on the stick and plant the native vegetation so it'll grow. The other one says, it's the winter, it ain't gonna grow, so you gotta put saw down. So it seems to me like they ought to just go with each other. Because one you use specific dates, and the other you use the general definition.
You're
of
talking about the
active growing
existing code
season.
section here?
Yeah, we didn't touch.
Yeah, we didn't touch that. That's how it currently reads.
Anyway, I just suggest you kind of do that. And then the only other thing is, since this is Oregon, and it does rain year-round, generally, as on number 2, is maybe add a sentence or piece that says, or required by this city. In other words, we can get really good rain in August, as an example, and you can start getting erosion. And so I just wanted you to make sure you had the hammer to be able to require them put straw down on exposed areas when erosion was happening, regardless of the time of year.
Okay.
So by just adding that, or is required by the city, would give you the leverage to do it.
So for number 1, what was your language?
Well, I just took the converse of what you had on 2, because if I take the outside of what you have on 2, I would say that the active growing season is April 1 to September 30.
But that's
Okay.
changing every year.
But still,
That's a
it's,
moving target.
The point is, when you enforce code,
Yeah.
you need to have some numbers.
Got it.
Because say active growing season, the developer's gonna go,
Yeah.
What
what's
is
that? You know,
So
and
specifying,
even though numbers can be really tough to deal with, you got a standard that you can walk up and enforce.
okay, so back to the variances part under 3, this was put in to, again, try and better protect the mitigation trees or help them hopefully survive. So protecting wherever they plan to put the mitigation trees, protecting that area as well with tree protection fencing during construction so that they're not planted in compacted soil. So again, this is kind of pushing it towards putting them in the tree preservation tracts, which would already be protected. Let's see.
I think 4 we've already talked about.
Yeah, 4 is this tree protection covenant, and then including the mitigation trees, and we already have that. We already do that anyway. We can strike that last sentence
Yeah.
about
yeah,
it growing.
Yeah.
yeah.
Which one, where are you at now in your discussion?
4, proposed 4.
17-102-74. Now we're on 5. So this was another kind of question. So where practicable, mitigation trees shall be placed in a conservation easement or tree preservation tract. We could just flat out say they shall be placed in one or the other, like we did for retention, and strike that where practicable, because that kind of can be a little confusing, I guess, what one person's idea of practicable is versus another.
Mhm.
So I would,
So
I
this
guess,
is saying
recommend.
they have to do it, the mitigation trees into it.
Yeah,
One way or the other,
one or
yeah.
the other, which I think, so, okay, I'm
Yeah.
gonna strike that where practicable.
Um,
And then the substitution more nearly meets the intent of the ordinance due to, and then we added at least one of the following, and there's 4 options, so we tried to decipher what these originally meant. So it said the location of the proposed new trees, which didn't really make sense. So we thought it would be, is more compatible with the required public infrastructure than the location of the existing trees. That's kind of the guess. C, kind of better defining what an undue hardship is, so specifying that it would be, the undue hardship would be creating development below the minimum density requirement. And then D, just adding in, people want to remove trees for scenic reasons a lot, but just that it would have to be protecting a designated public scenic view corridor, otherwise we'll have everybody wanting to remove trees so they can see whatever from their bedroom window, so. Specifying that it's, in the public interest.
I have a quick couple comments on, just back up above on number 2. Just a suggestion, I just say minimum of 6 feet, because 6 to 8 is not a minimum. A range can't be a minimum.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's 6 feet, it's 6 feet,
That's good, that's good.
And then the other one is we don't define caliper in the definitions, and we tend to use the word caliper when we're talking about deciduous. And what is the definition of caliper as you apply it, Kelly? Is it measured 4.5 feet off the ground, or is it at the root base, or?
Yeah, it is defined in the
Measured
code.
either 6 inches or
Well, I'm
1
just looking at the
foot above
definition
ground
section,
level,
I don't see
think.
caliper. So I thought I'd ask,
Yeah.
but I looked
It's
first.
somewhere in here, I don't know where. I don't know if it's
You have
in this
DBH
section.
defined, but you don't have caliper defined. And so all of a
think it
sudden,
is
my
defined
brain
in
went
the
and said,
code.
why do we
It's defined
distinguish
somewhere.
deciduous?
I remember seeing
Is it
it.
defined in 1710?
I think it's in 1710.
Not in 1710.
1710.
It's either 6 inches or
Not in
1 foot
1710.
above.
Not in 1710.
No, I just looked in 1710.
Yeah, we'll
If
look
it's
for it.
alphabetical, it's not there.
I've come across it somewhere, but we can add it.
I would add in caliper with.
I know where it is. It's in
Where-
1792. It
Okay.
definitely is there.
Okay,
So
well,
we would have
you
to-
might just put the definition of it right next to DBH, and that makes the section a
Yeah,
little
I
more
agree.
complete. But it's the diameter some distance off the ground, which is probably not
It's either
4.5
6
feet,
inches or
right?
12 inches. I
6
think.
inches, it's D.
6 inches.
Minimum of 7
that's
feet overall
right.
height or
1792
one-
50D.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll define it. We'll just put the same definition in this section.
Okay. And
It
then,
should just be in 1710, and then the other two could be taken out of the code, but for the time being.
That
we'll
would
just
be the
put it-
best place.
For the time
Add
being,
that
we'll
to
put
your
it in.
list.
Yeah, but where you're there, by the way, you can clean up DBH, and get off that 2 feet.
Yeah. There's a lot of cleanup in the definition section.
So this enforcement section is just, again, clarifying, do these issues we've been seeing. Before red is just tree removal, but this is clarifying that it's any other violations of chapter 17102 that includes failure to install or maintain tree protection measures, topping, excessive pruning, non-compliance with any conditions of a tree permit, removal of required trees or failure to maintain them, or conducting regulated activities without a tree permit. So that's just clarifying, again, what sort of things could be enforced. And then changing it so that 70% of the funds would go towards the urban forestry fund, because there does need to be some going towards like administrative for mailings and everything. The changes under 17-102-90 are just to reflect changes from the titles at the state level of these chapters. So that's all that's there.
Can I go back to 10270? Sorry, I know we're
No.
rapidly approaching the end here. Sub C, 6, sub C. I'm not sure how I feel about that. Just
Which
because
one?
this is 10276C.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're defining what an undue hardship is as minimum density.
Mhm.
That's
And I know-
that's what's gonna happen when they come to this planning commission. They'll give us a case and we'll decide on it.
Right.
Because that's a criteria for a variance.
To be below a minimum density. I mean, I've seen developers argue undue hardship a variety of ways here. But if you have a large site and the goalpost for what a hardship is minimum density, that could be a very big
Yeah.
deal compared to
See,
even an
I
average.
think they can solve this on the flip side, because on the flip side, I said, well, and Ron brought it up, what if you have a big field, there's no trees on it? Do we require them to plant trees to bring it up to the minimum retention level? And we said, well, no. So they said, put that on your list, that sounds like a good idea. All right, so if we had that in there, then that would be it. I mean, if they basically either meet the standard or they plant trees to meet the standard. The bottom line is, it's up to you. I mean, because undue hardship to them means less bucks. Because they want to get as many lots in as they can.
Well, sure, and sometimes those arguments are thin.
Yeah, they are thin, they always are, because that's why we're here, to see through those thin arguments. But the point is that at the end of the day, if we were to develop that other one, we wouldn't even really need this, because at the end of the day, if you do have development, you need to meet these standards. Either you retain the trees that are there, or you plant trees to that level.
Right.
Figure it out. See,
Right,
so
but you're setting that minimum bar at minimum density, which you can't develop at less than minimum, but you're defining hardship in that narrow sense.
But what if you came through and, again, I'm just throwing a number out there, that whatever land you're going to develop, that 5% of it is going to be, at least 5%, is going to be for tree retention. And if you don't have that, then it's going to be for a new tract of some type, for trees. But you're going to, if you've got 100 acres, now you've got 95, I'm just, whatever, I don't know what the number is. So that, again, if it's a flat field, then you're gonna end up with something at the end of it. And if you have a lot of trees, again, I'm just trying to figure out how the guy that is so densely forested why even develop this land? Okay, I've got so many trees on here, it's not even worthwhile to. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. I mean, I agree with that. If the code was written in such a way where it had that sort of predictability and certainty, then it'd be less of a.
Well, that's what I was talking to, we won't solve it, maybe more of the carrot of, hey, this is walking into it, this is, it's like sidewalks. If you're gonna put a street in, you gotta have sidewalks, right? But in terms of what the expectations are for vegetation, public vegetation, I'm gonna call it. I don't know.
well, this one section, if you look, a couple of thoughts, Kelly, clarify something here for me. Somebody comes in front of us and wants us a variance. Well, we have already the whole variances code, which they, not of the applicants making, on and on, right? This one specifically says, under type 3 review, the planning commission may allow newly planted trees to substitute for retained trees if.
Okay.
So it's not like we're letting them off the hook. We're just saying, well, you can go ahead and cut every tree out there that's the worst case scenario, right? But you still gotta plant some back. But they'd have to come to us for us to decide, is it an undue hardship for you not to retain any? And they'll come, and here's my experience. I'm planning commission now 13 years. Everybody comes in with a variance, has a big crying story, from if it's Walgreens or it's Fred Meyer, or if it's just Joe Developer Blodo. And at the end of the day, we challenge them a little bit, and at the end of the day, they might get a variance or so, but Walgreens they wanted 9, they got 1. Tractor Supply Store, how many variances they want, how many adjustments did they want, and we just said, no.
No, you gave them the one
Put the windows.
Square
Yeah.
footage.
Well, we got the one, yeah, but the point is that, you haven't showed them, but you showed me, within 2 weeks, they had us back a new drawing that had all the windows on the
Yeah.
Highway 26 side. Remember, they had 6% windows, and
That was
all of a sudden,
like
they got 30% windows.
less than
Son of
a
a
week later.
gun, how'd that happen, right? So
was
they're gonna
quick.
come to us and cry, and then we're gonna go, sorry, Sandy style, and then they go do it, but they gotta try.
Right. Well, your point about the the other code sections that address variances and the ability to put mitigation trees is good. Because I'm just thinking of other instances where maybe you build a collector or, other infrastructure that further boxes you in, and then you do really have these, sometimes a hardship argument is is good. A lot of times they're not.
Well, it's an
But-
argument
but
that
that's a
says,
good
I can't
point.
make any money if I have to meet it, and that's the end of the day.
I mean, I
They're saying
think
the land's
a-
not developable, I can't make any money, and we go,
I don't know of all the different scenarios you're thinking of, Todd, but I think A would, at least for the street or infrastructure. Isn't that what you're kind of thinking on A there?
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know, I agree with you that I think that on C, maybe there's better wording for that. I just don't know what it is.
well, I think
Yeah.
you're, I think you're
David did
pretty
say
much
define,
okay.
when
I
we talked to
think
Dave
it
Duke, and he did say define what a hardship is. And then my first inclination was, we don't want to just open it to any financial hardship.
right,
Because then that's kind of opening it up too much.
right.
So I don't know, that was just, I don't know if that's the magic wording, but, I don't know.
Yeah, okay. That just sort of jumped out at me, the
Yeah,
definition.
I mean, at the end of the day, every variance request that comes to us, in their mind, is an undue hardship, in their mind. That's why they're here.
You
Well,
can
every
always take
variance
off
request
the
will
undue
come to
hardship
you.
and still get what you want.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, I didn't mean to back up and.
No, no problem. No problem.
So, I think the last section, 17-102-100, is just talking about the urban forestry fund. So you already have one fund, just added that penalty enforcement could go towards that too. We've also actually already done this, I believe. We created a second fund.
We did, yeah.
Yeah, and so that we could use this fund to collect a fee in lieu payment for required mitigation trees. There's been a couple instances where, like for example, that one that I showed you where there were 4 retention trees. Well, they then had to mitigate with 8 trees. Well, we can't put 8 trees on a tiny little lot, or we're just gonna run into the same problem. So we had them plant, I forget how many, maybe 2, and pay a fee in lieu for the remaining 4 that we would then eventually will plant somewhere, like in a park in that neighborhood, or in the riparian zone or something like that. So
And
it's
it's a-
just creating a separate fund where we can keep that money, where that actually stays there and it doesn't carry over.
Yeah.
And in that case, that guy was happy about that. He said, I'd rather just give some money and not have to put all these trees
Right.
back into my
And
backyard.
maintain 'em.
And we're putting it into a private reserve fund that has nothing to do with the general fund that is getting audited yearly. So it's not like that money in the future, once it has 50 grand in it or something, it's just gonna get sucked
Yeah.
into some other fund randomly.
Fill potholes.
Yeah, it is getting put into, it's a special fund, like an SDC. I can't get touched for anything except that, and it gets audited, so.
And we already have it. This is just clarifying that it exists and that this is the process.
I think it's a good thing, but again, if you can, developer can come in and kind of buy their way out of it. You know,
Yeah.
they're putting, I'm trying to come back again, last time I'll say it, is trying to figure out of how to have them walk into the door knowing that, hey, I've got to do this, regardless if I have trees or not, and I can't buy my way out of it, I gotta do something, so I'm gonna make the neighborhood nicer. Because that's what trees does, right? Makes it more
Right.
livable.
So, 2 quick thoughts on that. I think that would be at your guys' discretion at the subdivision stage to say, if you did approve a variance, how many are gonna be mitigation trees and how many are we just gonna collect a fee in lieu for this fund? So I think you guys would have a lot of discretion on how we divide that up. The second thing is, I think, unless I'm just not thinking of all the scenarios, by and large, this will mainly apply to places that are required to have retention trees or already do have mitigation trees and they want to remove them in the future, like on all these lots we were looking at where it's not working, and then they can just, okay, I want to be out of the tree game, I don't want them in my yard. We say, fine, you pay us this amount per tree and we'll plant it somewhere else, and then you don't have to deal with it anymore. So I think that's what this is going to be used more for,
At the
is
individual level.
is the property owners already out there with mitigation trees in their backyard that in a year or 2 or tomorrow want to remove them, and then we just say, okay, that's fine. Here's a system that we can collect fees for. And then we can plant those trees on our property somewhere.
No, I understand that. I'm just trying to figure out a way to get them closer to the actual homes as opposed to, you know, down the street. It's kind of like buying a carbon
yeah.
footprint offset, okay? They're,
Yeah.
It is kind of like that, yeah.
Yeah.
It is like that,
Yeah, we are doing it within the same watershed, but that covers most of it.
Yep.
No, you are correct. It does do that essentially.
yeah.
But I guess my only,
It's better than nothing. Okay?
Correct.
Okay.
Exactly.
I'm just trying to get towards that side.
I mean, how I'm kind of looking at it too is if we have let's just say a 7,500 square foot lot that we approved, let's just say 15 years ago, with 2 retention trees on it, and now these things limbs are falling, the trees are getting in bad health. I'd rather just say to that homeowner, yeah, you can take them down, and now instead of putting more big Doug firs in your backyard, you can just pay for 4, and we'll locate them off-site.
Or plant 1 or 2 of them and we'll look at
Right.
the other 2 off-site.
A tree will be planted in your honor.
Yeah.
But you'll have to pay for it.
But not a lot, because then we maintain.
Okay,
it
so we made it
forever.
through this one. Has everybody kind of
Yeah.
got their thoughts in and their markups?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's what I want to do, because I'm comfortable with this going on. I'm a little nervous about Kelly and, and Emily having to present this to council, because they think we got questions. Wait till you hit those guys, because they haven't thought about it as much as we have. And I don't know, I would just, if you, my thought is, I think they know we have a problem, go less on that, and kind of, have in your PowerPoint, show what the desired future condition looks like. In other words, show them what this is trying to do, as opposed to worrying about what's going on now. Because I think that'd get them, their mind more towards understanding what.
I think they'll just be happy with it and they'll say it's good, and I
Is it
rubber
planning
stamp it, but I
commission
think it'll go.
Yeah, we work till
Right
10:30
through.
on it.
Yeah,
I would
you're
like-
not gonna wanna stay till 10:30.
I would like to go back or be brought
There's a
along
couple-
to it.
There's a realtor on there, city
Is-
council, yeah.
Is that we have kind of band-aided some of these and putting in front of them that, I mean, I think at least need to spend some more time again of how to create the right environment for the developers to do it up front. And again, I don't have the answers to that tonight, but that's really the thing is, instead of playing this cat and mouse game, where they're gonna sneak around is, I said it earlier, is bring some developers in, hey, what's a good compromise? What can we,
Well, I think we'll get that. We adopt this. And like you said, I think we gotta let it go for about 2 years. We can't be just changing it again in 2 months. We'll get that by
No,
design, because
I'm
developers are gonna start to look at the new
I'm
code.
saying something different. I'm saying go back, try, put this into play.
Into action.
Into action, okay? Not wait 2 years, but be more proactive, saying, hey, developers, what can we do
As we
Okay.
plan for the future.
as we plan for the future? Instead of saying where you figured out there are little holes over here and, little sneak arounds. Anyway,
Well, you'll get those too.
yeah.
Yeah.
What?
we'll always
Who
do
these
that.
developers you're thinking?
Okay, here's what we have to do. The first thing we really need to do is have somebody close the public hearing.
Thank you.
Did you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
You want a motion, right?
to close the public
No,
hearing.
someone could close.
Okey dokey, let's close the public hearing.
Second? Do we need a
Yeah,
second?
you can second
Yeah,
it.
we need a second. Was there a second?
Yeah.
Okay, been moved and second to close the public hearing at 10:30. All in favor say aye.
Okey dokey.
Aye. Okay, I think we've done our discussion, and now it's just to make a, I think what we can do, picking everything up, is we can have a motion that would
How come you didn't
forward
give us a motion on this?
staff's report. Yeah, why didn't you give us a motion? But the motion would be that we forward these code revisions to city council with our notations. Is that sufficient enough to, that came out of our discussion? And we're assuming
I moved that.
Rebecca's taking good notes.
I moved that. I moved what he
Yes.
said.
First, okay.
That was Don, moved it. Who's gonna second?
I'll second it.
Okay, Barry's gonna second. Let's go for a roll call vote.
Okay, Commissioner Carlton?
Yep.
Commissioner Lasowski?
Yes.
Commissioner McLean Wenzel?
Yes.
Commissioner Mobley?
Yes.
Commissioner Abrams?
Yes.
Chairman Crosby?
Yes, motion carries.
When does this go to council?
Don't make it.
Don't know yet, yeah.
Here to have business?
I don't think, is there any other?
The only thing I'll say is that we're going to have a meeting on October 29th, and so far the only thing on the agenda is a variance to utility connection standards for a potential gas station at Orient and 26.
Where?
Space age fuel.
Orient, okay.
Yeah.
Orient and 26 on that end?
Yeah, that probably
Yeah.
that just annexed last year.
Yeah, that's,
At that intersection there.
it's in the urban growth boundary, but not in the city, right?
It annexed into the
It's
city.
in the city limits.
Well, what side of the road?
What is, Traffic that goes through, and
northwest
the other
corner
is
of the
us that
intersection.
live here.
So kind of the
Two
pie.
towns.
Uh-huh.
The northwest corner?
Yeah.
Interesting. That's bad
There's a house
topography.
there.
The
No,
lot's pretty
there's not.
flat.
I mean, you go in like this, right? And then it's surrounded by,
By roads,
Roads.
yeah.
Cars
I
drive.
remember that.
A lot of cars sharing.
What's the variance?
boy,
Um,
Benson's gonna be upset. He ain't gonna be the first gas station in town.
No comment.
The guy on this end, right?
The variance is that the code currently says that the public works director, or maybe it says the planning director, I can't remember, can allow utility hookups for water outside the city limits.
No, no, where?
Yeah, water. But the code currently doesn't allow for sanitary sewer outside the city limits or broadband fiber. Like, you have to hook to those, and they're trying to get a variance to say that they wouldn't hook to broadband fiber or sewer, that they'd go off a septic system.
Aren't
And
they
that in the
annexing?
future, they're already annexed.
They're already in the city?
Mhm. And that in the future, once those services are to the property, that then they would hook up. So they would be non-remonstrance agreement to hooking up in the future.
Okay.
Why
And
would
we-
they
We
not-
seeked out the attorney's input on this, and he said the variance procedure would be the best way to go about them requesting it before you, and then we'll see what happens.
Okay.
But the area I'm thinking of, that's already in the city?
Mm-hmm. It's already annexed.
Throw up a map.
Anything
Throw up a
else?
map real quick.
Let's adjourn.
Yeah, I wouldn't get too far ahead of ourselves on it,
I don't think we,
because then we would have to declare it
I
as
think we're ready to
ex
go
parte
home,
contact.
but we do need an adjournment.
Are you ready for a room of gas station owners?
That's for sure.
Somebody make a motion so
You
we
get to
can.
chair that meeting.
Oh,
I did the last one.
Maybe we close the meeting.
I second it.
been moved and seconded to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
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 What's the, Kelly, what's the zone?
Commercial.
I-3?
Commercial.